Chapter 11:15. When the golden chariot disappeared and the world returned to normal, the old man fell silent. After a long while, he sighed softly and lowered his head to look at the space beneath him. He saw Su Ming, who had a contemplative expression on his face, and the screams of the three ferocious spirits beside him had become weaker. Their bodies, which were more than 100 feet tall, had already withered to an unrecognizable state. With a complicated look on his face, old Yamu sighed. "Oh well, I might be a patroller, but no matter what, the Abyss Builder's progenitor is my best friend. Su Xianyi's growth is also terrifying, so there's no need for me to get involved in this, but even if I don't disturb the boy, it won't be easy for him to learn my mountain shifter." The old man let out a cold harumph when he saw that only Su Ming and the ferocious spirit with the white fur on his head were left in the mountain beneath him. He lifted his right hand and formed a seal. Just as he was about to change the seal on the mountain, his eyes suddenly focused, and he let out a soft gasp of surprise. He saw Su Ming moving while he was in the mountain covered in fog. He was not heading towards the other circle of light, but towards the spot where the ferocious spirit with the white fur on its head was. He was charging towards it. Damn it! Could it be that besides the progenitor, all the other Abyss Builders have a grudge against the laws? That Abyss Builder's progenitor was foolishly loyal his entire life, but his two direct descendants are each more domineering than the other. Su Xianyi is one thing, but you, boy, how dare you challenge the laws I set? The old man let out a soft harumph. Just as he was about to change the laws with his right hand, he suddenly froze, because he heard Su Ming's words tumbling out of his mouth when he rushed out. "This circle of light belongs to me." Su Ming was surrounded by countless branches. They swayed and swiftly shrank. When all of them returned to Su Ming's body, a brilliant light shone in his eyes, and he rushed towards the ferocious spirit with the white fur on his head. He had intentionally said those words, and his goal was self-evident. The ferocious spirit who was originally standing in the circle of light saw Su Ming approaching and was about to take a step forward, but his footsteps came to a halt. A freezing glare appeared in his eyes, but he did not step out of the circle of light. Instead, he stood in it, lifted his right hand, formed a seal, and pushed it forward. With it, a whirlwind immediately appeared out of nowhere in front of the ferocious spirit. It charged forward with a howl and grew larger with each passing moment. In an instant, it was 100-something feet tall and swept up everything in all directions as it charged towards Su Ming. At the instant the whirlwind closed in, Su Ming swung his right hand, and the life inequity spear, which had pierced through a ferocious spirit in the distance and stabbed into a mountain rock, charged towards him. Once Su Ming held it in his hand, he rushed towards the incoming whirlwind without any hesitation. With a bang, Su Ming rushed into the whirlwind. The life inequity spear in his hand turned into a purplish-black light that shot through the whirlwind and rushed out. Su Ming's face was slightly pale, but it was instantly filled by the power of the flesh and blood essence spreading out from Akang's true form. That power came from the three ferocious spirits Su Ming had devoured just then. Almost the moment Su Ming broke through the whirlwind, the ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur standing in the circle of light had a glint shine in his eyes. He lifted his right hand and swung it again. Immediately, nearly 100 huge whirlwinds appeared around him. They surrounded the area with a howl, and in the blink of an eye, they grew to be several hundreds of feet tall. Faces manifested in them as well. That face belonged to an old man. His face was pale, but there was an awe-inspiring presence about him. He existed in the nearly 100 whirlwinds, and he charged towards Su Ming with them. When he closed in, murmurs came from the mouths of the near 100 faces. The voices fused together to form a buzzing sound. When it echoed in the area, anyone who listened to it for a prolonged period of time would feel as if the world was spinning, as if their chi and blood were flowing in reverse, and their souls were being torn apart. Su Ming's footsteps came to a halt, and a strange light shone in his eyes. The shadow of a sun appeared in his left eye, and the shape of a moon appeared in his right eye. Once they replaced his pupils, They overlapped with each other and turned into starlight. Illusion of stars, sun, and moon. At the instant this art appeared, Su Ming formed a seal with his hands, and his body moved swiftly. Immediately, the pupils of the ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur shrank, and a solemn expression appeared on his face. In his eyes, Su Ming had turned into hundreds of people, and they were charging towards him from all directions. He could not tell which one was the real one. Perhaps all of them were real. All of these changes were mainly dependent on whether the ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur believed them. If he believed them, then all of them were fake, but if he believed them, then all of them could be real. The profundity of this art lay in his heart. An illusory art that can turn the fake into the real within the real. What a thing. The ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur spoke for the first time. His voice was hoarse and ancient. When he spoke, he lifted his right hand and bent his waist to push down on the ground under his feet. At the instant his right hand touched the ground, the near 100 whirlwinds suddenly exploded at the same time, turning into a powerful wave of impact that swept towards the hundreds of Su Mings in his eyes. At the same time, at the instant the old man pressed his right hand against the ground, the mountain trembled, and in his eyes, mountain rocks appeared on Su Ming's body. Hundreds of mountain rocks appeared at the same time, as if they were suppressing him and trying to freeze Su Ming's body. The impact of the collapsing whirlwinds also appeared in the area, and because of it, an inescapable net was formed. Booming sounds reverberated in all directions, but before the ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur, the hundreds of Su Mings who had been suppressed moved at the same time, and what appeared around him were not just hundreds, but thousands of Su Mings. I see, so that's how it is. As the old man with the tuft of white fur spoke faintly, he swiftly closed his eyes. At the instant he did so, he swiftly sliced his right palm with his left hand, and a wound appeared on it. When blood flowed out, he flung his right hand, and the blood instantly spread out. "Mountain blood," the old man said calmly. The old man calmly spoke, and with a wave of his hand, the earth immediately turned red. The sky also turned crimson, and a bright red mountain of blood appeared in the world. When the mountain descended from the sky and the ground turned red, it did not matter whether it was the mountain rocks, the collapsing whirlwinds, or the thousands of Su Mings. All of them turned red. Only one of the thousands of Su Mings not too far away from the old man with the tuft of white fur did not turn red. "You're here." When the ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur spoke flatly, he turned his head around and looked at Su Ming coldly. Almost at the same time, he looked over. The blood-red mountain in the sky shattered on its own and turned into countless mountain rocks that charged toward Su Ming. A large amount of red whirlwinds also appeared out of nowhere around Su Ming and closed in on him. Booming sounds shook the sky and earth. Su Ming coughed up blood and staggered a few steps backwards. When he coughed up blood again, he lifted his head swiftly and stared at the indifferent-looking ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur in the circle of light. He sucked in a deep breath. It was not that his illusion of stars, sun, and moon had never been broken before, but in the past it was only because they chose not to believe in it and simply chased it away, but in truth the art was still around. Yet right then, this was the first time he met someone who had clearly seen through the art, but still chose to believe in it. However, once he found his true self, he would forcefully destroy everything he believed in. Those who could do this were definitely people with incredible confidence, or else it would be very difficult for others to do so. It was just like the dreams of mortals. If they died in their dreams, and even they believed that they had died, most people would choose to return to dust, but there was a type of person who would still ferociously try to resurrect themselves from the dead, even if they believed that they had died. This was the power of willpower. Su Ming belonged to this type of person, and the ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur in front of him was clearly this type of person as well. A powerful enemy. Su Ming stared at the ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur. In truth, he had never underestimated this person. The situation at that moment was within his expectations. The ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur also stared at him. At the instant their gazes met in midair, Su Ming suddenly spoke. Why is there a need for you to stand in the circle of light and become a game for others to watch time and time again? Whether it is within or outside the circle of light, it is all a game. It is the same for me, and it is the same for you. The ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur said calmly. I have the will to break this game, but you don't, Su Ming said again. Game? What is a game? The game in this place is in your eyes. You can see it, but how can you break the game you can't see and change it? The ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur still had a calm expression. I can't see the game outside the circle of light, but I know that I can choose whether to walk out or not. It will not change because of the changes in the rules of others. As for the games I can't see, since I can't see them, then they don't exist, but you aren't. A barely noticeable glint shone in Su Ming's eyes. He took a step forward, and his words were firm. When the ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur heard this, he suddenly smiled. I know very well whether I am or not. If I want to walk out of this circle, I will. If I don't want to, it's useless for you to say anything. When Su Ming heard the ferocious spirit's words, he also smiled. He moved, and when he rushed forward, he lifted his right hand and pointed at the sky. Dao Avenue Mountain! The world roared, and Dao Avenue Mountain manifested swiftly. Peace arrives when the elephant is here. As Su Ming spoke, a huge scale appeared in the air above him. Beside it was a white elephant that stood erect like a piece of jade. Su Ming swung his arms, and all the power of divine essence in his body erupted from him. When it swiftly fused into Dao Avenue Mountain, the malicious spirit roared and shot out. It seized the scale, and the white elephant landed on the scale. The malicious spirit pointed at the ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur in the circle of light. Malicious spirit weighs the elephant. But that was not all. When Su Ming brought out the divine essence treasure that allowed the malicious spirit to weigh the elephant, he lifted his right hand and pointed at the sky, then pushed his left hand against the ground. Between the past and the future is destiny. Destiny's first transformation. Su Ming wanted to use the power of the first transformation of destiny to forcefully weigh the elephant. The mighty pressure and damage he would cause would be several times greater than in the past. As the expression of the ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur in the circle of light changed, a glint appeared in the eyes of old Yamu in the fog above him. Shunbai, win against this person, and I will grant you your freedom. Old Yamu's voice reverberated through the mountain beneath him. At the instant the ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur heard it, his body shuddered, and a powerful presence that had never appeared before erupted from his body. At the same time, the ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur called Chunbai lifted his foot and walked out of the circle of light. But at the instant he walked out of the circle, his face suddenly turned pale, as if he had remembered something. When he looked towards Su Ming, a complicated look appeared on his face. You, who won't change your will because of other people's changes in the rules, why did you walk out of the circle now? At the end of the day, you're still someone else's game. You will never have this so-called freedom. With just one sentence from someone else, you can make you give up on your will. In this state, your mind is no longer firm. Do you have the confidence to win against me? Su Ming's eyes sparkled as he asked calmly. If he wanted to destroy a powerful enemy, he would first destroy his will, then his beliefs, and finally his physical body. This was the strategy Su Ming had prepared beforehand. He did not underestimate this person. On the contrary, he regarded him very highly. That was why he had said those words, to make Chunbai think that he wanted to snatch the circle he was in and make old Yamu think the same. Then, with that, he would first crush Chunbai's will. This was a prison where words were spoken. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 11:16. Su Ming's words were sharp, and when they landed in the ferocious spirit's ears, his expression changed several times. Once he reached his level of cultivation, he would focus on training his heart. With a strong will, he would be able to walk down the path of cultivation without any hesitation. However, the foreshadowing in Su Ming's words and the step he took in the end, due to his desire for freedom, caused a crack that could not be healed to appear in the ferocious spirit's heart. One of them was his dignity. It was a will that could not be changed in the world because of his will. This will was not something that could be suppressed by a powerful level of cultivation, because if he did not want to, he could choose not to obey Yamu's words, but the price he would have to pay would be incredibly great. But in truth, he still had the right to choose. However, when he took that step forward, his right to choose disappeared, just as Su Ming had said. It would change because of the changes in the people around him. Because of it, his heart immediately trembled. For the sake of my own freedom, I am only obeying for now. How can I say anything else? The ferocious spirit glared at Su Ming. As he spoke, he took a step forward, lifted his right hand, and pushed his palm against the ground. With it, a thick blood-red light appeared on his right hand. As it spread out, a gigantic circular red rune of light appeared on the ground where he pressed his palm. A large number of runic symbols shone at the edges of the rune. As they swam about, the blood-red light on the rune reached a piercing degree. Living fiend, the ferocious spirit roared. The rune on the ground he had his hand pressed against started moving swiftly and charged towards Su Ming. Su Ming's eyes sparkled. When the red rune closed in on him, he formed a seal with his right hand and pointed forward. Immediately, the treasure with the malicious spirit that weighed the elephant rushed towards the rune. He wanted to use the malicious spirit to weigh the rune and the ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur. Booming sounds spread through the area again. With them, the ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur lifted his right hand from the ground, and the red rune on the ground rose into the air. When it surrounded Su Ming, it crashed into the malicious spirit that weighed the elephant. A powerful impact swept out in all directions. The malicious spirit's body was torn apart, and, as he tumbled backwards, he disappeared without a trace. The scale also shattered. Only the white jade elephant crashed against the red rune. As if it was trying to suppress it, countless cracks instantly appeared on the rune before it shattered. They were evenly matched. A freezing glare shone in Su Ming's eyes. At that moment, he was in the form of a child after Destiny's first transformation. With a single move, he lifted his right hand and swung it forward. Immediately, the air around Su Ming started distorting. As time flowed backwards, the disappearing malicious spirit appeared once again, and the shattered scale gathered together once more. Again, as Su Ming took a step forward, the malicious spirits beside him roared. The picture of the elephant weighing the scales surrounded the area as if it occupied the sky, and it charged towards the ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur. The art to reverse time. When the ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur's pupils shrank, he did not stop moving. Once he walked out of the circle of light, he lifted his hands at the same time and roared towards the sky. Broken palm. As the ferocious spirit with the white tuft of fur roared, the palm lines on his raised palms showed signs of breaking. Immediately after, the ferocious spirit took a step forward and roared once more. Crack! A large amount of blood immediately appeared out of nowhere on the ferocious spirit's palms. It was as if his palm lines were no longer palm lines at that moment, but wounds. As blood gushed out from his hands, the ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur pushed his palms against the ground. The ground trembled, and a huge red rune that was several times larger than the previous blood-red rune appeared on the ground. It was about thousands of feet in size, and with the ferocious spirit's hands as the center, it started flashing. The rune was no longer circular, but square. As it rotated, endless blood-red light spread out from the edges of its edges. Booming sounds echoed in the world as the countless runic symbols rotated in the rune. The rune spread out swiftly and charged towards Su Ming. Su Ming swung his right hand, and the malicious spirit behind him roared and rushed out. But at the instant it did so, a ferocious smile appeared on the ferocious spirit's lips, and he lifted his hands swiftly from the ground. Seal the area before the rune. As his voice echoed in the air, The blood-red rune that was closing in on Su Ming swiftly rose into the air and stood vertically. It blocked the path in front of Su Ming and crashed into the malicious spirit. When booming sound spread out, Su Ming's entire body jolted. He immediately noticed that at the instant the red square rune appeared in front of him, his body froze for a moment against his will, as if it had been frozen in place. It was as if the rune erected in front of him had captured his body, causing him to be unable to move for an instant. At that moment, the ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur's piercing voice echoed in the air. Second rune, seal the rear. Another blood-red rune appeared under the ferocious spirit's feet, and it instantly appeared behind Su Ming. The appearance of the rune caused Su Ming's body, which had been slightly loosened, to freeze once more. As his expression changed, Su Ming noticed that his level of cultivation had been completely suppressed by the two runes, and his body had also been forcefully immobilized. He was not the only one affected. The malicious spirit was the same. In fact, the balance pole and the white jade elephant had also stopped moving in midair. What is this divine ability? Su Ming's pupils shrank. Third rune, seal the land. Fourth rune, seal the sky. Fifth rune, seal the void. When the ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur spoke, blood-red runes appeared one after another around Su Ming. There were 5 in total, but they looked as if they were connected to each other to form a huge seal around Su Ming. Sixth rune, seal the heart. With a bang, the 6th rune appeared under Su Ming's feet. Because of it, it formed an incredibly perfect seal that completely sealed Su Ming within it. At the same time, the ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur rushed forward and turned into a long arc. At the instant he rushed into the rune, he stretched his arms outwards. Hand of the abyss, seal the soul with 7 runes. At the instant he spoke, the ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur let out a bang and distorted. He disappeared in midair, but in the span of a breath, he appeared beside Su Ming, who was sealed by the red rune. However, when he appeared this time, he was no longer in human form. Instead, he had turned into a black skeletal hand that stretched out swiftly from the ground. The skeletal hand looked as if it had stretched out from the ground, but if anyone took a closer look, they would be able to tell that it had grown out of the rune. This was the ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur's killing move. He had fused his body with the rune and turned into the black skeletal hand. That hand was several dozens of feet big. When it seized Su Ming, the ferocious spirit's crazed roars immediately echoed in his ears. With my body, I will activate the 7 seals rune. Seal, seal, seal. At the instant the ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur said the word seal, a powerful whirlwind erupted from the skeletal hand. With the skeletal hand as the center, it meant that Su Ming was the center. As the whirlwind swept about violently, intense pain surged through Su Ming's entire body. His flesh and blood were swiftly torn apart. His cultivation base was continuously disappearing, and his soul was in pain as if it was being torn apart. When the second word appeared, a violent bang shot up, and Su Ming felt as if his entire body was about to shatter. The power of the seal around the rune turned into a wave of impact that was equivalent to self-destruction, and it was continuously destroying and wiping out his body. It was especially so when the third word seal fell from his mouth. Su Ming could not move. He was seized by the skeletal beast, and his body was torn apart by the whirlwind. Blood flowed out of his eyes, ears, nose, and mouth, and a powerful sense of life-threatening danger rose swiftly in his heart. This is my strongest divine ability. You think I can't kill you? Seal. When the ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur spoke again, a bang shot up from Su Ming's body. A large amount of blood gushed out of his body, and under the destructive blow from the sealing power and the whirlwind tearing at him, his body was immediately torn apart. His arms were swiftly removed from his body. His legs were torn apart, and his body was also torn to shreds like a piece of paper. However, he did not break. At the same time he was torn apart, A large number of branches and thin threads connected Su Ming's limbs. They were like his veins, and they were forcefully connected to his body, causing the tearing to not be complete. However, the more they did so, the stronger Su Ming's pain became. In the midst of the intense pain, he gritted his teeth and did not roar. Instead, crazed killing intent appeared in his eyes. The greater the pain, the greater the killing intent. The greater the pain, the stronger the struggle in his life became. Die, seal. When the ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur said the fifth word seal, a large number of the connections between Su Ming's limbs were broken. As they were broken, the indescribable pain caused Su Ming to grit his teeth, and it turned into an eruption of life in his body. When the intense pain erupted, Su Ming threw his head back and roared. As he did so, it was as if all his pain had been vented out. At the same time, a hint of his cultivation base was restored. You're the one who should die. At the instant that hint of his cultivation base was restored, Su Ming turned his head around. When he spoke with a ferocious expression, a strange light shone in his eyes. Possession. When Su Ming said those words, a dark light shone in his eyes before it instantly became dull. But at the instant it did so, his soul spread out and rushed out from the center of his brows to charge towards the skeletal hand formed by the ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur beneath him. At the instant his soul touched the skeletal hand, he heard the ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur utter the sixth word seal. Booming sounds surged into the sky from Su Ming's side. His body swiftly turned into blood fog. When he collapsed, he was torn apart and fused into the rune. Booming sounds reverberated in the air without end, stirring up a powerful wave of impact on the ground. It distorted the air, causing old Yamu's pupils to shrink while he stood in the fog. He could not see what had happened for a period of time, but he could sense that Su Ming was not dead. I'll start updating tomorrow. I'm 5 chapters behind. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 11:17. The booming sounds lasted for about 20 breaths before they slowly calmed down. Then the distortions in space caused by the impact in the area gradually returned to normal. The mountain was still a mountain. Not a single spot on it was damaged. The 2 circles of light were still around, and they were shining with a dazzling light. Su Ming had disappeared. Perhaps more accurately speaking, his body had disappeared, but there was an endless amount of blood on the ground, and the crimson rune was still around. The square formed by the 6 squares shone with a blood-red light. The skeletal hand in it had also disappeared to turn into the ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur. He was kneeling on one knee in the rune, unmoving. His eyes were closed, and there was fatigue on his face. Not a single ripple of aura could be sensed from him, making him look like a dead person. Time passed quickly. In just the time it takes for half an incense stick to burn, the ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur opened his eyes. A brilliant light shone in them, and he lowered his head to look at his body. After a long while, when he lifted his head, he lifted his right hand and pushed it against the ground. His body immediately trembled violently, and all the blood in the rune floated up and charged towards his body. As it fused into him, the ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur started changing rapidly. His body slowly shrank, and the shriveled boils on his body shrank. A large amount of black smoke spread out from them. His hair gradually grew longer, and when all the blood in the area fused into his body, he returned to the height of a normal person. His body also recovered completely, and he no longer looked as ferocious as before. He was dressed in a white robe, and when he lifted his head again, what was revealed was Su Ming's face. There was no surprise on old Yamu's face in the fog above him. Clearly, he had long since seen what would happen. However, his expression was dark, and no one knew what he was thinking about. Su Ming sucked in a deep breath. He did not completely possess the ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur. Instead, once he obtained the memories related to the 7 Seals rune, he devoured his soul and gave up on his body. He only used the ferocious spirit's physical power to reform his body. The strength of the Seven Seals rune made Su Ming feel lingering fear in his heart, which was why he was in a hurry to obtain this art, and the only way to do so was to devour the ferocious spirit's memories while he was possessing him. This was the Abyss Builder's inborn ability. However, if it was not because Su Ming had opened a crack in the ferocious spirit's cultivation heart with his previous words, then his possession would have definitely been much more difficult. At that moment, Su Ming exhaled and looked at his right palm. Once he lifted it, he pressed it against the blood-red rune before him. The instant his hand touched the rune, it shone and gradually dimmed. When it disappeared without a trace, Su Ming lifted his head once again and looked at the fog above him. The fog was indistinct, and Su Ming could not see clearly, but at that moment, a crack appeared at the center of his brows. The malicious eye swiftly revealed itself, and the fog in the sky was instantly magnified several times in his eyes. Through the layers of cracks, in just the span of a few breaths, Su Ming saw old Yamu in the fog, and he also saw the dark expression on the old man's face. Su Ming looked at old Yamu, and the old man was also looking at Su Ming. Their gazes met in an invisible manner through the fog. "I won," Su Ming said faintly. Old Yamu fell silent. After a moment, he lifted his right hand and swung his arm. Immediately, the mountain beneath him roared. As it swayed violently, Su Ming lowered his head and immediately noticed that a huge vortex had appeared at the top of the inverted mountain. As it rotated with loud bangs, it continued, growing larger. In the blink of an eye, a mountain appeared beneath the whirlpool. It was a mountain that was exactly the same as the one Su Ming was standing on. The mountain was standing upright, and its two peaks touched the mountain where Su Ming was. This scene looked like the shape of a funnel. Su Ming also saw Zhu Yu Kai climbing at the forefront of the mountain under the vortex, and behind him were Reverend Zilong and Huang Mei. Besides these three people, Su Ming also saw the old flame fiends and Long Hai, as well as Xin Shang, Huayu, and Huayu, as well as Su Hui. Almost at the same time, Su Ming saw the crowd. They saw an upside-down mountain appear before their eyes as the mountain swayed violently. As the vortex in the world roared, an upside-down mountain appeared before their eyes, and within that mountain was Su Ming. "He's not dead." Xin Shang, Huayu, and Huayu immediately sucked in a sharp breath. At the instant they saw Su Ming, their hearts trembled. Tears fell from Su Hui's eyes. She stared at Su Ming in a daze, who had appeared on the inverted mountain above her. It was as if she was looking at him for the rest of her life. Progenitor Long Hai's expression remained the same, but his heart let out a thump. However, he knew that even if he did not take action to save Su Ming would not pursue the matter too much. After all, with his level of cultivation, Su Ming would definitely value him greatly. When he thought of this, even though he was slightly anxious, his expression did not change. The eyes of Flame Fiend's progenitor sparkled. He was incredibly nervous. He understood Su Ming better than Long Hai, and at that moment, he could not help but feel regret. When Zilong saw Su Ming, his expression remained the same. However, his pupils shrank slightly because he noticed that Su Ming was the closest to the top of the two mountains. When Zhu Yu Kai saw Su Ming, a hint of a smile appeared briefly on his face, but it soon disappeared, and he returned to his ugly self. As for the yellow-browed man, he let out a cold harumph at that moment and moved a little faster. In the face of the mighty pressure in the land, he gritted his teeth and walked towards the top of the mountain. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. The expressions on these people's faces allowed him to see many problems, especially when he remembered that the chain could have brought him and Su Hui up at the same time, but an accident had happened on the way. Zhu Yu Kai's voice had been in that accident, and he had mentioned the yellow-browed man. Because of that, Su Ming could already guess everything. Zhu Yu Kai had saved Su Hui, and the yellow-browed man had used some unknown method to stop him. Su Ming's expression remained the same. He cast a cold glance at the yellow-browed man, and the aloof look in his eyes was the same as when he had looked at the white-robed teenager in the past. Su Ming did not speak. With one step, he charged toward the top of the mountain. He was so fast that the group could not hope to compare to him when their cultivation bases had disappeared. They could only watch helplessly as Su Ming turned into a long arc and charged towards the top of the mountain. He was so fast that in the span of a breath, Su Ming had already stepped on the spot where the two mountains came into contact with each other, right between the two mountains. Su Ming might have seemed calm, but he was already prepared for a fierce battle in his heart. After all, Old Yamu's expression had been hostile just then. There was a high possibility that he would remove the mighty pressure on the others at that moment, causing the fight to instantly reach an intense state. But when Su Ming arrived at the stone platform at the top of the mountain, the others still climbed up slowly. Not a single sign of their cultivation bases being released was shown, and they could only watch helplessly as they stood beside the stone platform. Zhu Yukai sighed and gave up on moving forward. Reverend Zilong frowned and cast Su Ming a profound glance before he also chose to give up. A strong unwillingness to give up appeared on the yellow-browed man's face, but he was still hundreds of feet away from the top of the mountain. I'm not the sort of person who goes back on his word. Since I promised you that if you can reach the top of the mountain, you will be my scion, I won't try to stop you. Old Yamu's voice immediately appeared in Su Ming's mind. The two mountains have different opposites. One of them leads to the sky, and the other leads to the earth. It is not enough to gain an epiphany alone. You must gain an epiphany at the same time, and only then will you obtain the true mountain shifter art. I didn't create this art on my own, but inherited it from Mountain Shifter Expanse Cosmos in Dark Dawn's Union. This art is a supreme evolution of Mountain Shifter Expanse Cosmos Heavenly Change. It is on the same level as your Abyss Builder's 9 echelon sword styles. They are both arts formed by nature. Learn it, and I will send you to the core of the 5th kiln. Before that, I will definitely not go back on my word regarding the serendipity I promised you. Old Yamu's voice echoed in Su Ming's mind, but as Su Ming listened to it, he had a strange feeling. It was as if Old Yamu's words were not meant for him. Instead, they were meant for someone else, but his voice was clearly echoing in Su Ming's mind. Su Ming cast his gaze over the other people in the area, but none of them seemed to be able to make Old Yamu explain things in such a manner. 9 echelon sword styles. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. This was the first time he heard of this art. That's what your Abyss Builder's progenitor created after he gained an epiphany towards the changes in the world in arid Triad Expanse Cosmos. He claims to have 9 echelons, but at most, I have only seen 7 echelons. Even your Abyss Builder's progenitor believes that you can only reach the remaining echelons in theory. You will naturally learn about this in the future. Hurry up and gain an epiphany of my Mountain Shifter art. Once you learn it, I will have fulfilled my promise, and this projection will be able to leave the 5th kiln. Old Yamu's voice echoed in Su Ming's mind. A glint appeared in his eyes, and he swept his gaze past the 2 stone platforms beside him. There was an iron book placed on each of them. At that moment, as Su Ming looked over, light shone on them. Su Ming fell into a moment of pensive silence before he lifted his right hand and placed it on the stone platform above him. At the instant his right hand touched the stone platform, the inverted mountain trembled viciously. Cracks swiftly appeared on its surface, and in the blink of an eye, the mountain started showing signs of crumbling. At the same time, a loud bang rang out in Su Ming's head. An epiphany towards the universe, the world, and the world surged into his divine sense and filled his entire mind. It turned into an endless amount of memory fragments that stirred up a storm in his heart. Su Ming saw mountain after mountain in the endless amount of memory fragments in the storm. Among them was Dark Mountain, the 9th summit, and all the mountains Su Ming had seen, walked on, and touched in his life were among the many memories he had of his life. The mountains were of different heights, and, as they swiftly overlapped with each other, an indistinct epiphany gradually rose in Su Ming's heart. In the eyes of others, Su Ming's hair was dancing in the air at that moment. The air beside him distorted, and mountains continuously manifested. As they swiftly changed, more cracks appeared on the inverted mountain above him, and the signs of it crumbling became stronger. A mighty pressure that had never appeared on Su Ming's body appeared with a bang, and it immediately caused the hearts of the others to tremble. It was especially so for Huang Mei. Intense jealousy appeared in his eyes, and as his expression twisted, veins popped up on his face. It won't be easy to obtain such a powerful divine ability just like that. Huang Mei gritted his teeth and struck the gourd on his back with his right hand, then let out a loud shout. "Treasured gourd, please kill him. I'll start updating tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 11:18. That shout was filled with energy and confidence. Even if they were on a mountain and the sound of the mountain shattering above Su Ming reverberated in the air, it was still incredibly loud, and it attracted all the people's attention. It was especially so for Reverend Zilong. At the instant he saw Huang Mei strike the gourd behind him with his right hand, his pupils shrank. Zilong had always been wary of Huang Mei's gourd. He had vaguely figured out its origins, which was why he had always been giving in to Huang Mei. Even when the two of them had fought for the supreme treasure together and were ambushed by a despicable sneak attack, Zilong could only attack for a short while. He did not want to force the man into a corner and could only force down his anger. The source of all of this was the gourd. In Zilong's eyes, he was 8/10 certain that this gourd was a supreme treasure of the universe from the fifth true world. Right then, when he saw Huang Mei finally bring out the treasure and heard him say that he wanted to kill Su Ming from the gourd, Zilong immediately sucked in a sharp breath. His guess was correct. Zhu Yukai's expression also changed when he saw and heard what Huang Mei said. Xian Shang and the other two did not know the origins of the gourd, but when they saw the yellow-browed man's actions, their hearts immediately trembled, because as the yellow-browed man spoke, a powerful ripple erupted from the gourd. That ripple spread out in waves and turned into a gigantic vortex that swept out in all directions. Luya's gourd. Progenitor Long Hai's expression changed several times before he cried out in surprise. He stared at the gourd, and his nascent divinity showed signs of dispersing. It was the same for Flame Fiend's progenitor. He stared at the gourd on Huang Mei's back, and a strong hint of greed appeared on his face. Huang Mei saw the crowd's expressions, and a cold sneer appeared on his lips. He had obtained this gourd for many years, but he had rarely used it because he wanted to use it to decide the victor of the battle in one go during the crucial moment. He originally did not have any intention to immediately use it. Instead, he was prepared to kill someone before he could obtain the mountain shifter art and snatch it. Su Ming's appearance had crossed Huang Mei's bottom line. He would absolutely not allow anyone else to obtain this powerful art. He was determined to obtain this mountain shifter art. Let's see who else dares to snatch this technique from me after I kill this person. As Huang Mei laughed coldly, he did not believe that Su Ming had even the slightest chance of survival. In his memories, as long as he used the gourd, then unless the person's level of cultivation was much higher than his, then that person would definitely die. As he laughed coldly, the gourd on his back shone brilliantly. As the vortex rumbled, an eye appeared on the body of the gourd. There was an aloof look in that eye. When it appeared again, it immediately stared at Su Ming. When it blinked, a thick wave of white smoke immediately shot out from the mouth of the gourd. It brought with it a thick fragrance that immediately filled the area. From the distance, it looked as if a white cloud had erupted from the mouth of the gourd. Only I, Huang, can comprehend this mountain-shifting art. You're just a child. You're just seeking your own death. Huang Mei laughed madly. As the gourd on his back rumbled, the fog erupted. At the instant, Su Ming opened his eyes on the top of the mountain and lowered his head to look at Huang Mei. A strange look involuntarily appeared on his face. All the people saw that strange expression, but no one knew the true meaning behind it. Your gourd is a little slow when you attack, Su Ming said with a strange look in his eyes. Once he said those words, the crowd was stunned, especially Huang Mei. He was even more stunned. That was indeed the case. This was what made him feel rather helpless about his gourd. Every single time he finished chanting the incantation, about a dozen something breaths would pass before the divine ability would appear in the fog. Fortunately, once it was activated, it could lock down on the person in an invisible manner, making it difficult for the person to escape. Even if it's slow, it's still enough to kill you, Huang Mei said arrogantly. Su Ming's expression became even stranger. He sighed. His expression caused the others' gazes to sparkle, because there was not a hint of panic on his face at that moment. Instead, it was so strange that it made people suspicious. Yet the instant the crowd was puzzled, Su Ming no longer hesitated. He lifted his right hand and patted his storage bag. Immediately, a small gourd the size of a palm appeared on Su Ming's right palm. As he lifted it up, he swiped his left hand over the gourd. "Treasured gourd, please kill me," Su Ming said with a strange tone. He believed that one of the two gourds was a fake, but he trusted the bald crane more. Su Ming would never forget the bald crane's change when it saw the gourd in the past. He felt that there was a high possibility that his gourd was the real one. Almost at the instant Su Ming brought out the small gourd, the expressions of the other people in the area changed, and strange expressions appeared on their faces at the same time. Even with Reverend Zilong's composure, he still widened his eyes at that moment, and disbelief appeared on his face. Even Zhu Yukai blinked instinctively. As he looked at Su Ming and Huang Mei, a smile that he could not suppress appeared on his lips. He felt that this scene was truly out of his expectations, and it was rather absurd. Compared to the two of them, Xin Shang, Huayu, and Yinyu, you were slightly unable to accept this scene. They stared at the small gourd in Su Ming's palm, then at the big gourd on Huang Mei's back. Their minds were completely occupied by the two gourds. The big one should be stronger. Besides this thought, everything else in Xin Shang's mind was blank. As for Progenitor Long Hai, he sucked in a sharp breath. He suddenly realized that Su Ming had so many secrets hidden on him. Just the gourd alone had the effect of overturning the universe in this place. Flame Fiend's progenitor blinked. He could not quite tell which one was the real one. It was especially so for Huang Mei. His expression changed drastically, and he cried out in surprise. You, why do you have one as well?" At the instant he finished speaking, the gourd behind him let out a bang again. A large amount of white smoke erupted from it, and a small human rushed out from within. The small human's body was semi-transparent, and she held a black blade in her hand. There was a slightly dazed expression on her face, and, judging by her appearance, the small human was a female. When she rushed out of the fog, she glared at Su Ming. "Treasured gourd, please kill him." Powerful killing intent appeared in Huang Mei's eyes. When he saw that Su Ming also had a gourd, a bad feeling rose in his heart, but when the small human appeared in his gourd, that feeling immediately disappeared. He lifted his right hand, pointed at Su Ming, and roared loudly. The small human in the gourd behind him immediately lifted her head and let out a piercing roar before rushing towards Su Ming. Fog tumbled around her and enveloped her body. She looked as if she was riding on clouds, and her murderous aura surged into the sky. An indescribable mighty pressure erupted from the gourd. That mighty pressure was incredibly sharp, as if it could sweep through all the laws in the world. So what if you also have a gourd? You're just a fake, and you dare bring it out in front of Huang Mei's real one. When Huang Mei spoke, 7 eyes immediately appeared on the gourd in Su Ming's hand. The 7 eyes blinked at the same time, and a hint of aloofness appeared in them. When Huang Mei saw them, his heart let out a thump against his chest. He remembered that only one eye would appear on his gourd every single time. However, when he remembered that his gourd would definitely succeed every single time it appeared, a great amount of confidence rose in him. When Huang Mei's confidence appeared once again, fog immediately erupted from the gourd in Su Ming's hand. At the same time, a small human the size of a palm rushed out from the gourd. In its right hand was a blade. However, the small human in Su Ming's gourd was very small, but it was not an illusion. Instead, it was incredibly corporeal, and its appearance was even clearer. It was just like a real person, and it was not female either, but male. Su Ming's gourd did not show any signs of slowing down after Huang Mei chanted the incantation. Instead, it immediately flew out, and unlike the small human in Huang Mei's gourd, it did not utter a single word in midair. One of them roared, and the other was silent. One slowed down, and the other immediately flew out. Even if they had not come into contact with each other, the people in the area were all intelligent people, so there was no way they would not be able to tell which one was real. However, the only thing that made them hesitate was that one of them was too big and the other was too small. At the instant disbelief appeared on Huang Mei's face, the small human in his gourd immediately turned its head around and bit his neck. Huang Mei was clearly already used to this. He did not dodge and simply allowed the small female human to suck his flesh, blood, and essence. When she let go, she roared and rushed out, crashing into the small human in Su Ming's gourd in midair. In the midst of Huang Mei's nervous anticipation, his body suddenly jolted. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but his face turned pale, and he coughed up a mouthful of blood. That blood was not because he was injured, but because he felt aggrieved. He was not the only one. All the other people in the area had incredibly strange expressions on their faces as they stared at the scene in the sky with a dumbfounded expression. There was no fighting, no killing, and neither were there any loud booms. The small human that flew out of Su Ming's gourd only stood in midair for a moment, but the small female human in Huang Mei's gourd immediately started shuddering. She actually put on a bashful expression towards the small human in Su Ming's gourd. But that was not all, because the small human in Huang Mei's gourd had actually approached Su Ming's small human from the gourd with an aloof and prideful expression. In fact, Su Ming's small human from the gourd even put on an expression that said he did not quite like it. He nodded reluctantly, and only then did the small human from Huang Mei's gourd stand up again. With a single move, he swiftly shrank until he was the same size as Su Ming's small human from the gourd. When the people saw this, no matter how they looked at it, they could only see that the small female human was full of admiration. The first chapter was to be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 11:19. At the same time, cracking sounds could be heard, coming from the bottle gourd on Huang Mei's back. Cracks spread out across the surface of the bottle gourd, and in the end, a boom could be heard as the bottle gourd shattered into pieces. I'm sorry, but I also have a gourd. Su Ming let out a fake cough, and a freezing glare appeared in his eyes. He lifted his right hand and pointed at Huang Mei. Immediately, the small human from the gourd and his lover in midair lowered their heads. Once they cast Huang Mei an aloof glance, they moved forward and charged forward at the same time. Huang Mei was so enraged by Su Ming's words that he coughed up another mouthful of blood. An incredibly aggrieved look appeared on his face, and as he lifted his head to roar, despair appeared on his face. His roar was shrill and forlorn, as if no matter how much he roared, he could not vent the extreme anger in his heart. Just as the two tiny people from the gourd drew close and were about to slice the yellow-browed man's neck with their blades, the yellow-browed man abruptly loosened his grip on the rock and fell straight into the abyss. The bodies of the two small people from the gourd flashed, and as they continued to close in, a large hand immediately appeared in the air beside the yellow-browed man. It grabbed the yellow-browed man and used the back of the hand to knock against the two small people that were closing in on him. Booming sounds surged into the sky. As the two small humans from the gourd tumbled backwards, a chilling look appeared on their faces. It was especially so for Su Ming's small human from the gourd. A powerful killing intent shone in its eyes, and with a single move, it returned to Su Ming's side. As for the small human from the gourd who originally belonged to Huang Mei, it followed Su Ming's and arrived beside him. Adoration appeared in its eyes as it stared at Su Ming's small human from the gourd. It looked as if it would give up everything for just one look. Su Ming lifted his head slowly and looked at the fog above him. The killing intent in his eyes grew stronger. He swung the gourd in his right hand, and immediately the small human from the gourd flew back into it. The female small human who originally belonged to Huang Mei also entered the gourd with him. Fortunately, Huang Mei was being dragged into the canyon by the hand, or else he would have definitely coughed up a huge mouthful of blood if he saw this. "You want to save him?" Su Ming asked flatly while staring at the fog above him. He willingly entered the ground. "With my Tao, there's a way to enter the ground. Naturally, I want to save him." An ancient voice came from the air above him. It belonged to old Yamu. This time, his voice echoed in the air, and everyone heard it. Su Ming did not speak. Instead, he stared at the space above him with an aloof gaze. Whether Huang Mei lived or died might be important to Su Ming, but compared to the thoughts in his heart at that moment, it was insignificant. Su Ming had been guessing previously that old Yamu was clearly talking to him, but no matter how he listened to it, it sounded like he was giving an explanation to someone else. If this had happened somewhere else, Su Ming would not have thought too much about this or a strange thing, but he was in the fifth kiln. Because of that, he had no choice but to think about it. Since Huang Mei and old Yamu were determined to save him, Su Ming immediately decided that he might as well use this matter to test them. He did not speak, and there was not a hint of compromise on his face. He just stared at the sky and stood at the top of the mountain, remaining aloof and silent. If old Yamu's tone has softened, then it means that my guess is correct. Then old Yamu must have run into someone in the fifth kiln when I was climbing up the mountain to fight against him. It is this person who caused me to be wary of him, which is why I said those words as if I was explaining something to another person. But if his words have not softened, then I might have made a mistake in my judgment. These thoughts raced in Su Ming's head, but not a single hint of them showed on his face. Time trickled by. After about a dozen breaths, a sigh came from the fog above him. "All right, I've been here for many years. If I want to leave now, I'll need a physical body. That boy just now is pretty good, so I'll just borrow him for a while. Once I leave, he will no longer be him. Aren't you going to hurry up and understand my mountain shifter art?" The voice from the fog above caused Su Ming's heart to tremble violently. In silence, he lowered his head and cast a glance at the iron scroll on the stone platform. Once he sucked in a deep breath, he lifted his hands. Just as he was about to push them down again, he did not lift his head. Instead, in a seemingly casual manner, he spoke calmly. "When I was fighting against the ferocious spirit just now, which clone of my father did you run into?" "The third." Old Yamu instinctively answered, but when he was halfway through his words, a brilliant light suddenly shone in his eyes. "The third clone, huh?" Su Ming asked flatly. He had a strong feeling that Yamu was staring at him from above the fog. However, Su Ming's habit of not changing his expression had already become ingrained in his bones, and he was not worried that Yamu would be able to see through him. What he said just now was purely to get information out of Yamu. He said on purpose. Even if he said something wrong, it didn't matter. What he wanted to do was to see Yamu's reaction and make a judgment. But even Su Ming did not expect that his words would be able to get an answer that caused his heart to tremble violently at that moment. "What a cunning boy, but I like your cunningness. As for the matter between you and your father, I don't want to get involved." Old Yamu smiled in the fog and did not say another word. Su Ming's heart trembled. He closed his eyes and pressed his palms against the two mountain rocks. As booming sounds reverberated in the air, everything in his mind was forced down and was completely replaced by the illusions of mountains. As the mountain above him crumbled, cracks gradually appeared on the mountain beneath him as it swayed. More cracks appeared, and the number of mountains in Su Ming's mind also increased. Eventually, with a bang, the instant the mountain above him crumbled to pieces, the countless illusions of mountains gathered together in Su Ming's mind to turn into a black ball of light. That ball of light was an illusion, and there were countless mountains shining within it. A vast, mighty pressure spread out from within Su Ming's body, and Su Ming could sense it clearly. During that instant, all the people who sensed the mighty pressure from Su Ming's body had their expressions change, and they felt as if there were 10,000 mountains pressing down on them. Booming sounds rose up again, and the mountain beneath them crumbled again. When it shattered into mountain rocks, the people on it were swept up, and at the instant they were swept up, all their cultivation bases were instantly restored. At the same time their cultivation bases were restored, the black ball of light in Su Ming's mind gained corporeal form from its illusory state. In the end, it turned into a brand that was branded into Su Ming's soul. The shape of the brand was formed after 3 glowing spots were connected together. It contained a primitive presence, as if it had been formed naturally when the world was created. At the instant the brand was deeply imprinted into his soul, Su Ming sensed the existence of mountains in the universe. They were countless mountains, mountains in countless planets, mountains in countless illusions, and mountains in countless people's memories. They formed a law that no one in arid triad expanse cosmos had yet to discover. The mountain shifter art cultivated the law of mountains. Mountains are also 3. 3 points form the structure of a mountain. This point is the beginning of the world, and it is the source of power. Those from the worlds beyond who will inherit mountain shifter expanse cosmos, remember that mountain shifter art is only the first style. This art has only one style ever since it was created. If anyone from the worlds beyond is fated to create the second style, then come to mountain shifter expanse cosmos and leave the second style behind, because we in this expanse cosmos have no desire to inherit the mountain shifter art. We only have this desire. At the instant the brand appeared in Su Ming's mind, an ancient voice echoed in his mind. That voice seemed to have come from the passage of time, and a sincere will filled it. Su Ming's heart trembled. He opened his eyes, and the shadow of mountains appeared in his pupils. At that moment, Su Ming had a strong feeling that with just one thought, he could control all the mountains in the universe. The world crumbled at that instant. As the fog tumbled about in the area, the mountains shattered, and a gigantic vortex appeared out of thin air above them. As the vortex rotated with loud bangs, a powerful suction force swept up the group's bodies and dragged them towards the vortex. At the instant Su Ming opened his eyes, he saw Su Hui in the distance. She had already closed in on the vortex, and by her side was Xianshang. His arms seemed to have been grabbed by Su Hui, and panic appeared on his face. When he shook his head continuously, fear appeared on his face, and in the end, it turned into anguish. Su Ming did not look closely. With one move, he took his first step, and when his foot landed, a point appeared. When Su Ming took his second step, the second point also appeared. He leaped up and appeared beside Su Hui above the 2 points. A smile appeared on her face, and she let go of Xianshang's hand, causing him to be swept into the vortex. She allowed Su Ming to hold her, and the third point also appeared. At the instant the 3 points appeared, they instantly connected together to form a mountain. That mountain might be an illusion, but it allowed Su Ming to hold Su Hui in midair and remain unmoving under the vortex. It was as if a real mountain had appeared in the sky. Where is my serendipity? Su Ming held Su Hui in one arm while she stared at him and asked flatly in the direction of space. There are many worlds in the 5th kiln, but only this one was created by me alone. Your serendipity is the essence that has gathered over the years in this world. Old Yamu's voice echoed in the air above him. At the same time, the entire world roared furiously. Shadows appeared one after another beside Su Ming. There were dozens of them, and all of them looked like ferocious spirits. Nian Yin was among them. These ferocious spirits were all people who had been captured by Old Yamu over the years. At that moment, all of them stood still, but as their bodies rapidly withered away, a large amount of life force erupted from them. That life force turned into white threads that charged towards Su Ming. Second chapter to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 11:20. Su Ming swept his gaze across the area and immediately saw the 3 people he had not absorbed by Kang's true form. There was also no ferocious spirit with a tuft of white fur among the ferocious spirits. Clearly, those who had been absorbed by Kang and possessed by Su Ming were as if they had truly been wiped off. From then on, they would no longer be a part of old Yamu's game. At the same time, as a large amount of the life force from the ferocious spirits in the area rushed into Su Ming's body, a loud bang rang out, and his cultivation base increased exponentially. It instantly filled his entire body. This was the life force of the dozens of ferocious spirits in the area. It was the essence formed from their cultivation bases, and at that moment, all of it spilled out and filled the entire world. The other people in the world had long since been sucked away by the vortex. They had no idea which dimensions they had been sent to. At that moment, the only ones left were Su Ming and Su Hui, who was in his arms. In the face of the rampaging power spreading out from the ferocious spirits, Su Ming's expression immediately changed. My cultivation base has recovered, and I have the power to protect myself. You don't have to bother about me. Su Hui smiled faintly and said softly to Su Ming. When Su Ming turned his head around to look, he saw Su Hui blinking. A cunning look appeared in her eyes, and her appearance changed swiftly. Even her body instantly distorted. In just the span of 2 breaths, Su Hui turned into the body of the supreme treasure. You're too embarrassed to snatch this, but it's fine with me, so I got it for you, Su Hui said with a smile. She left Su Ming's arms and retreated swiftly. She withstood the rampaging power in the area. Su Ming blinked. He remembered Xian Shang, who had a bitter expression on his face when he went to hug Su Hui just then. He did not know what method Su Hui had used to threaten Xian Shang into giving her the supreme treasure. With the body of the supreme treasure around, Su Ming believed that Su Hui would be able to obtain the greatest degree of safety, which was why he no longer thought about how she had obtained the supreme treasure. Instead, he sucked in a sharp breath towards the incoming vast life force. With it, Su Ming's body let out a bang as if he was about to explode. The rampaging life force and the power of his cultivation base spread out madly from the dozens of ferocious spirits around him and surged into Su Ming's body. This scene was just like how they were transferring their cultivation bases. Besides a few people, the dozens of ferocious spirits were all almighties in Mastery Realm. Because of that, the transfer of their cultivation bases was a great serendipity that the universe had never seen before. The serendipity could have been a little gentler. If that was the case, Su Ming would not have felt so terrible, but old Yamu did not have the obligation to make the serendipity gentle. His thoughts were very simple. I'll give you the serendipity, and as for how much you can absorb, that will depend on your own abilities. If you have the ability, then absorb it all. If you can't withstand it and explode on your own, then that is the result of your greed. It has nothing to do with me. Old Yamu watched Su Ming absorb the energy with a cold glare. When he spoke flatly, a brilliant light shone in Su Ming's eyes. But at that moment, he could not speak. The rampaging life force and power from his cultivation base around him caused his body to circulate rapidly and continuously absorb it. Fortunately, Su Ming had experienced this sort of thing when he was in the God Ascension Nectar, or else if it was anyone else, they would definitely panic. This was good fortune, but it was also a tribulation. However, Su Ming had the right to choose and give up on this tribulation. Once he gave up, the serendipity would stop, and he would not be in danger of dying, but if he gave up so easily, then he would not be Su Ming. His entire body was drenched in sweat. Booming sounds rang out non-stop from his body, and a large amount of life force seeped into him from all his pores. The circulation of Su Ming's cultivation base could not keep up with the influx of life force and power from his cultivation base. In just a moment, Su Ming threw his head back and roared. His cultivation base clone had broken through the later stage of World Plane Realm and attained great completion in World Plane Realm. Since this is a serendipity, then I might as well give you more. Old Yamu cast Su Ming a glance, and a malicious smile appeared on his face. He lifted his right hand and swung it. Immediately, the world roared into the sky. The entire dimension shattered, and as booming sounds reverberated in the air, The dimension he had created immediately crumbled. As the dimension crumbled, the air distorted, and the origin power that had gathered in this dimension over the years erupted. It immediately surged into Su Ming's body and surged madly into him, causing his body to instantly swell up. Absorb it. Remember, if you can't absorb it, don't say that I didn't give you a serendipity. Once you can't last any longer, search for a place to avoid the dimension's collapse. Then, step into the vortex formed after the dimension collapses. Through it, you will be relocated to the core of the fifth kiln. I have already fulfilled my promise. Boy, how much you can absorb will depend on you. Old Yamu smiled faintly. He moved, and his appearance changed. His body turned into an illusion, but soon it gained corporeal form and turned into Huang Mei. He lowered his head to look at his own body, and the smile on his face grew brighter. He turned around and took a step into the air. In an instant, he disappeared from the crumbling dimension. Su Ming. Su Hui immediately cried out anxiously while she was in the rampaging dimension. She wanted to get closer, but under the rampaging power, she was continuously forced back and could not get any closer. It's fine, I can still hold on. As Su Ming's body swelled up, he threw his head back and roared. His body immediately grew larger, but his cultivation base let out a bang and stirred up a windstorm. The windstorm might have been instantly suppressed and collapsed, but at that moment, Su Ming's cultivation base reached a breakthrough. Shockingly, a moon had appeared behind him. It was a gray moon, and it exuded a boundless demonic aura. There was also a dense aura of death spreading out from the gray moon. As the moon appeared in the collapsing space, the violent energy in the surroundings furiously fused into it. Booming sounds reverberated in the air. They came from several of the dozens of ferocious spirits around Su Ming who were passing on their cultivation bases to him. Once their bodies became incredibly shriveled, they self-destructed. Old Yamu's art caused these former cultivators to not waste a single bit of their cultivation base after they delivered it to him. Even their souls had to explode and turn into essence after they were reduced to powder. If they could absorb it, they would, but if they could not, then Yamu could not say that he did not give them a serendipity. The serendipity is right there. You can see it, but I will make it so that once you reach your limit, you can no longer absorb it. This was Yamu's counterattack against Su Xian. However, his counterattack had landed on Su Ming. Without an epiphany and forcefully gathering together my cultivation base, it will all be in vain. The galaxy beyond the fifth kiln distorted. Old Yamu, who was in the form of Huang Mei, walked out of the air. He turned his head around and cast a glance at the fifth kiln before smiling faintly. Su Ming sensed a great sense of danger in the collapsing dimension. Forget about the origin of the chaos after the dimension collapsed. Just the dozens of ferocious spirits around him were already difficult for him to continue absorbing. He might have broken through great completion in World Plane Realm and stepped in a Lunar Culpa realm, but the moon that appeared in Su Ming's body was a dead moon. If I could absorb all the scattered life force, cultivation base, and the origin of the dimension in this place, then my level of cultivation would increase by leaps and bounds. But if I don't have an epiphany, then everything will just be an illusion. In the end, I will only be like a man with great strength, but I won't be able to control it with my mind, and I won't be able to bring out even a single bit of my strength. The absorption of this serendipity is too fast. I won't have time to understand it at all. This is Old Yamu's goal. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. But I will definitely take this serendipity. Su Ming swiftly closed his eyes. At the instant he did so, an incredibly thick aura of death appeared on his body. At the same time the aura of death appeared, waves of chilling air spread out from Su Ming, causing the collapsing dimension to look as if it was about to be frozen. Snowflakes appeared and swirled in all directions. Not a hint of warmth could be sensed from Su Ming's body. He was as cold as a dead man. He opened his eyes at that moment, and they were gray. Su Ming did not have the epiphany of those in Lunar Culpa realm, but he had an epiphany that came from his life. It was the path of moving from winter to spring, of moving from death to awakening, of moving from death to bright yawn. The gray moon symbolized Su Ming's death, and it symbolized the midwinter of his life. As the aura of death erupted from Su Ming's body, the gray moon behind him immediately became indistinct. A large amount of life force, the origin of the dimension, and the rampaging power from his cultivation base surged madly into Su Ming's body. Then, they swiftly flowed out of his body and turned into the power to form the moon in lunar Kulpa realm. Su Ming's long hair danced in the air, and he looked incredibly chilling. He stood in midair, and his body swiftly returned to its original size. The gray moon behind him shone with the light of death. At the same time, a fierce glare shone in Su Ming's eyes. He lifted his right hand and struck the center of his brows. With a bang, overlapping shadows immediately appeared on Su Ming's body. It was the clone that practiced the art of swallowing hollow shadows whole, appearing and standing to Su Ming's right. At the instant the clone that practiced the art of swallowing hollow shadows whole appeared, the life force and the rampaging power in the area swiftly spread out and surged into the clone, causing it to immediately crumble with a bang. However, as it crumbled, the flesh and blood that had spread out tumbled backwards, as if it was reassembling itself. As it spread out, it continued gathering together, and every single time it spread out and gathered together, the body's strength would increase by another level. Gradually, as the clone that practiced the art of swallowing hollow shadows whole continued reassembling itself, a second lunar Kulpa realm appeared behind it. The color of the moon was red. It was a red that was as red as blood and as enchanting as autumn leaves. The gray moon symbolized death and midwinter, while the red moon symbolized the struggle of death and the desire to dye the sky red with blood. At that moment, Su Ming's Akane clone appeared above his cultivation-based clone and his clone that practiced the art of swallowing hollow shadows whole with a bang. The three clones formed 3 dots at that moment, forming the mark of a mountain, the towering mountain that did not move the universe. Boom! The entire dimension shuddered violently. Old Yamu, who had been walking through the galaxy beyond the 5th kiln with an indifferent expression, came to an abrupt halt. When he turned his head around, his expression changed. Third update, please vote for recommendation. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1121. There were 3 spots on the mountain. At that moment, Su Ming's cultivation-based clone was the first spot in the collapsing dimension. The gray moon on the spot represented death and midwinter. Su Ming's clone that practiced the art of swallowing hollow shadows whole was the second spot. The crimson moon was filled with the intersecting aura of life, force, and death. It had the bright red of autumn, and it was the domain of autumn that Su Ming had come to understand in his life. Above his cultivation-based clone, and his clone that practiced the art of swallowing hollow shadows whole, was Su Ming's Ikang clone. He was the third spot on the mountain seal. Once his Ikang clone appeared, a moon also appeared behind him. It was a piercing yellow light. That yellow light was the same color as the moon itself in the eyes of the people. But in this place, it represented endless flames and heat. It was summer fire, a brashness that was filled with exuberant life force. The 3 clones and the 3 moons of lunar Kulpa realm turned into an unshakable world when the mountain seal was formed. As the rampaging power of his cultivation base swept through the area and the space crumbled, its existence made it seem as if it would not be destroyed even if the world crumbled. It was an eternal existence that would survive even if the universe was destroyed. The dozens of ferocious spirits in the area were swiftly withering away. A large amount of life force surged into the area, and it was immediately devoured and absorbed by the mountain seal formed by Su Ming's 3 clones. The life force swiftly spread out and was melted by the 3 moons of lunar Kulpa realm. Gradually, the aura of death on the gray moon became even stronger. The gray light spreading out from it seemed to represent the shadow of death, causing Su Ming's cultivation-based clone to exude a grayish-green air. He looked like a dead person who had just walked out of hell. However, there was a chilling, merciless aloofness in the cultivation-based clone's eyes. That gaze was enough to make all those who were familiar with him feel unfamiliar. He looked like a god who controlled the darkness of the world. Su Ming's clone that practiced the art of swallowing hollow shadows whole was a powerful physical body that did not practice divine abilities, but only trained in the body refinement art. At that moment, as the life force and cultivation bases surged into his body, he continued becoming stronger. As he crumbled and reassembled himself, his physical body became even stronger. Each of his bones and every inch of his flesh and blood became stronger at a maddening pace, as if they had been refined thousands of times. The crimson color of the moon he formed was like the blood on his hands. The smile on his lips brought with it a terrifying air. His body dyed red by the moonlight also gave others a feeling, as if he was a mad immortal who was fighting against the heavens while standing between life and death. Above the two clones was a Kang clone, who looked as if he was being held up by the god of lunar Culpa realm and the mad immortal who was fighting against the heavens. At that moment, his Akang clone was no longer in human form. There were countless twisted branches spreading out from his body. When they surrounded the area, it looked as if he had turned into a tree. As it threw its head back and let out a soundless roar, the branches around it immediately surrounded it. The yellow moon that appeared behind Akang immediately erupted with an indescribably powerful and vast life force. That life force was the heat of summer, and it came from Akang's life. Only a powerful life like Akang, which Old Man Extermination had written about in his ballad, could be worthy of Su Ming's realm, which represented summer. It could support the great amount of life force that existed in the moon that represented summer. That life force was the heat of summer. It also came from Akang's life. Only Akang, a life that was so powerful that Old Man Extermination would write about in his ballad, was worthy of Su Ming's realm that represented summer. It could support the moon that represented summer and the great amount of life force that existed in it. This is my creation, 3 mountains illuminating the moon. Su Ming's 3 clones roar at the same time. As the 3 moons swiftly absorbed the life force, the dozens of ferocious spirits around Su Ming immediately let out continuous booming sounds. They were the sounds of the ferocious spirits self-destructing after they delivered all their life force and cultivation bases. Booming sounds echoed in the air, and after about a dozen breaths, there were only 4 ferocious spirits left from the previous dozens of them. The 4 ferocious spirits shuddered. They were already reduced to skin and bones, and there was still a dazed look on their faces as they delivered their souls. But they only lasted for a few more breaths before they exploded with a bang. When all the ferocious spirits self-destructed, a large amount of power swept through the area with an even more violent presence. It rushed towards Su Ming as if it wanted to make him explode. It was a domineering will that said that he had to absorb it regardless of whether he wanted to or not. A bang rang out in Su Ming's mind. The seal of the mountain, formed by his 3 clones, started swaying under the impact. Soon after, the cultivation bases formed by the ferocious spirits' self-destruction forcefully fused into Su Ming's 3 clones to nourish the moons. However, this forceful rush could no longer be considered as nourishment, but a forceful expansion. I still lack a clone. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. What I lack is my real physical body as an abyss builder. That will be my real body, and it will be the body that will allow me to walk from death to life, from winter to spring, the resurrection of all lives. A brilliant light shone in Su Ming's eyes. At that moment, he had never longed so much for his real body to appear before him. He longed to fuse with his real physical body and complete the final step of his realm of life. To walk from death to life. To walk from closing his eyes to opening them. This desire spread out intensely from Su Ming's 3 great clones and turned into a summoning that could pierce through space and dimensions. As that summoning spread out, it shot through the fifth kiln, divine essence star ocean, and the four great true worlds, keeping a lookout over the barren lands of the four great true worlds, and reached true morning Tao world. In true morning Tao world was the core of the vast rune formed by countless fragmented continents. On the altar was a corpse that had not moved for countless years. At that instant, it started trembling violently. That shudder made it seem as if it was about to wake up. As it shuddered, the altar beneath the corpse shone with an extremely bright light. At the same time, it spread out rapidly and instantly covered all the fragments in the area. At the same time, booming sounds echoed in the air, and the gigantic rune in the galaxy was activated. As the rune was activated, a powerful, mighty pressure descended and suppressed the corpse on the altar, causing it to be unable to stand up no matter how much it trembled. It could not even open its eyes. At the same time, as the rune was activated, booming sounds reverberated in all directions. As a powerful, mighty pressure descended, many of the people in true morning Tao world instantly noticed it. Outside the formation, there were two rotating stars. On one of the stars, there was a woman in white sitting cross-legged. This woman was extremely beautiful, but her expression was cold. She frowned as she stared at the formation in the distance. She could sense that the formation was activating on its own and was suppressing it. "Someone is summoning us," the woman said softly. At the same time, there was a black-robed man standing at the summit of a mountain on another planet. He was staring at the rune in the galaxy. His face was covered by the black robe, and no one could see the changes in his expression. However, based on the way he stared at the rune, it could be vaguely seen that the person was solemn at that moment. "The child has grown up and learned how to summon, but this corpse is about to be used. How can I let you take it away like this?" A hoarse voice came slowly from under the black robe. There was a hint of age in that voice. Yet at the instant his words echoed in space, the huge rune formed by the countless fragmented continents suddenly let out a loud bang that shook the sky and earth. It looked as if the galaxy itself was trembling. At the same time, 8 of the fragmented continents that formed the rune crumbled into pieces. As booming sounds echoed in space, the corpse with its eyes closed on the altar at the center of the rune started trembling even more furiously. Its body started showing signs that it was about to float up. This scene caused the white-robed woman's expression to change. The black-robed man also let out a cold harumph and swung his arm. Immediately, thousands of long arcs rose from the 2 planets. The thousands of long arcs were thousands of cultivators, and as they charged forward, they appeared around the vast rune. At the same time, they sat down cross-legged, as if they were suppressing something. As booming sounds rang in the air, the corpse that had seemed like it was about to float into the air sank back down and was pressed down on the altar once more. Yet at that moment, a roar that seemed to have come from space swiftly reverberated in the hearts of all the cultivators in the area. There was a hint of madness in that roar, along with a hint of struggle and determination. It was a roar from Su Ming, who was in the 5th kiln in Divine Essence Star Ocean, wanting to summon his real physical body back. As he roared, loud booming sounds rose into the air. A large number of the fragmented continents from the rune crumbled, and the thousands of cultivators shuddered simultaneously. At the instant they coughed up blood, the corpse on the altar at the center of the rune floated up once more. The black-robed man moved without any hesitation and instantly disappeared. In an instant, he appeared on the altar at the center of the rune. He lowered his head to look at the corpse, then lifted his right hand and pushed down. With it, the galaxy trembled. The corpse was pressed down on the altar once more. At that moment, it was as if the entire galaxy's presence had gathered on the black-robed man's right hand. It was as if he was borrowing the power of true morning Tao world to suppress the corpse. However, at the instant the black-robed man used true morning Tao world's power to suppress the corpse, the power suddenly disappeared from the black-robed man's hand. It was as if true morning Tao world had taken the power from the black-robed man's hand on its own. The Kismet won't allow it. The black-robed man lifted his head to look at the space above him. The corpse on the altar floated up once more, and the shadows of 3 moons appeared beside him. 2 of them were at his feet, and 1 of them was above his head. They formed a mountain, and as the shadows of the moons appeared, countless distortions appeared in the area, as if they wanted to move through space and disappear. The black-robed man let out a cold harumph. He lifted his right hand again, and his fingernails instantly grew longer. With a flick of his wrist, they broke off, and like sharp needles, they sliced through the air and pierced the corpse's body. With a bang, the distortions around the corpse immediately shattered and disappeared. However, at the instant the 5 fingernails pierced the corpse and the space around it disappeared, the corpse's eyes flew open. This was the first time the corpse had opened his eyes. This was the first time the corpse had opened his eyes. At the instant he did so, a low voice that seemed to have suppressed the passage of time tumbled out of the corpse's mouth, and it shook the universe. DT on. If you like this work, please come to Start Point and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1122. DT on. In the collapsing dimension within the 5th kiln, the roars from Su Ming's 3 clones echoed in all directions. During that instant, Su Ming had a strong feeling that he was summoning his real self, and he felt as if he was already in his real self's body. He could move his real self through space and come to this place. However, he had been stopped multiple times. Su Ming had used the rampaging power in this place to forcefully take away his real physical body, but at the most critical moment, he had been stopped once again. Yet this time, Su Ming had gathered up all his cultivation base. With the power of lunar Kulpa realm and the 3 mountains illuminating the moon, he had forcefully broken all the barriers and opened his eyes. What he opened was his real, physical body's eyes. It might have only been for an instant, but he saw a black-robed person and saw the face under the black robe. It was DT on. One of these days, I will seize my real, physical body back. Su Ming threw his head back and roared. There might no longer be any ferocious spirits around him, but the collapse of the dimension had already reached its peak. It was at this moment that the collapse of the dimension caused a deafening roar to echo out. It was as if the entire world was exploding, and the entire dimension was completely destroyed. As it did so, all the rampaging power swept through the area and surged towards Su Ming. It was as if his existence was the only black hole in the dimension that had self-destructed. The pupils of Su Ming's 3 clones shrank at the same time. At the instant the rampaging power surged towards them, they formed a seal with their hands at the same time. With a bang, their moons and lunar Kulpa realm erupted with a powerful light. That light was formed by gray, red, and yellow. At the instant they overlapped with each other, Su Ming let out a low roar. 3 mountains illuminating the moon. Almost at the instant Su Ming roared, the moons of his 3 clones continuously grew larger, and they overlapped with each other at the center. The 3 moons swiftly turned into one. It was so big that at the instant it appeared, it was immediately swept away by the rampaging power from the collapse of the dimension around it. But at the instant they touched each other, the moon started absorbing and devouring them. Booming sounds reverberated in the air, causing Su Ming's moon to grow larger. When it became several hundreds of feet big, it was a moon that no cultivator had ever seen before. In fact, it was a huge moon that had never appeared in the world before. This was because the moon of Kulpa was formed by the cultivation bases of dozens of almighties. It was formed by the essence of time in a dimension. It was formed by Su Ming's life as he moved from death to life, from midwinter to spring. Booming sounds reverberated in the air, and the dimension shattered. Su Ming did not waste even a single bit of the serendipity. He absorbed all of it and formed the strongest lunar Kulpa realm that no one in the past, and perhaps no one in the future, would be able to do so. Even those in solar Kulpa realm were incredibly weak before this moon. This was a moon in lunar Kulpa realm that could threaten even almighties who were masters of fate lives, and death. At the instant the moon was formed, Su Ming's three clones swiftly fused together and turned into one person. The moon was behind him, causing Su Ming to look like he was filled with a monstrous, malicious aura. After all, no one had such a huge moon in Lunar Culpa realm. The three colors shining in the moon continuously overlapped with each other on Su Ming's body. When the gray light appeared on his body, he became the embodiment of the dark abyss in the universe. He represented death and destruction. When the red light appeared on Su Ming's body, it did not just dye his body red. His mind and soul were also dyed red. At that moment, Su Ming was a crazed immortal who was in charge of slaughter. The red was his desire for blood, and it was Su Ming's determination to dye the sky red in the past. When the yellow light appeared on Su Ming's body, he no longer represented death and the red of autumn. He no longer represented destruction and slaughter. Instead, he represented extreme life force. He was a person who pitted and nourished all manner of lives in the universe. He was an existence that would allow anyone who followed him to obtain endless life and live eternally in the summer fire. The three different personalities, different presences, and different feelings they gave others once they fused together caused Su Ming's malicious aura to surge into the sky. In fact, the word malicious could no longer be used to describe his bizarreness in the world. But there was one thing that was certain. At that moment, Su Ming was an existence that had never been seen before in arid triad expanse cosmos. When he opened his eyes, the world was destroyed before him, along with the body of the supreme treasure that was tumbling backwards in the turbulence after the dimension was reduced to nothingness. Su Ming turned his head around. At that moment, his entire body exuded the presence of death. He was dressed in a gray long robe, gray hair, gray eyes, and a merciless and aloof body of death. He took a step forward. Under the impact of the world's destruction, there seemed to be no power that could stop Su Ming's footsteps. With one step, he appeared beside the body of the supreme treasure, lifted his right hand, and grabbed its arm. Su Hui's heart trembled. At that moment, when she saw Su Ming's gaze and gray eyes, her breathing froze. A strong sense of unfamiliarity rose in her, causing her to be unable to recognize that the person in front of her was Su Ming. With the hand holding the body of the supreme treasure in hand, the gray Su Ming lifted his head. With an aloof look in his eyes, he moved swiftly towards the space formed after the dimension collapsed. A loud bang shot up, and the sound of air being torn apart shook the heavens. Su Ming rushed into space with Su Hui, and with a flash, he disappeared into the destroyed world. At the instant he disappeared, Su Ming turned his head around and cast a glance at the countless fragments formed after the world beneath him shattered. With a merciless look in his eyes, he cast a glance at one of the fragments. It was also at that moment that old Yamu's expression turned incredibly sour while he stood in the galaxy beyond the fifth kiln. He had been able to sense everything about Su Ming in the dimension because he had left a brand behind before he left. What he did not expect was that Su Ming would notice the brand existence. And what he did not expect was that at that moment, Su Ming's entire body had become so strange that even Yamu's heart would tremble when he saw him. Moving from death to life, moving from midwinter to spring, what a man. Su Ming, what a man. Old Yamu mumbled to himself after a long while. 3 mountains illuminate the moon. The 3 great clones turned into mountain seals, and a moon was reflected at the same time. This moon has never been seen before, and its strength is enough to shock even an ordinary almighty in Mastery Realm. He could have used this serendipity to reach Lunar Culpa Realm, or even step into Mastery Realm, but he didn't. The more he did that, the greater his scheme became. It can be seen that what he's after is his real physical body, because if he was not complete, then even if he became a master of fate, he would not be able to obtain such a serendipity. If one day he fused with his real physical body, then he would be complete, and he would move from death to life through his epiphany and reach Life Realm. This is your scheme. You created a divine ability that will allow you to step straight into life realm out of the four great realms of Masters of Fate, Lives, and Death. This divine ability is on par with the Mountain Shifter art and the 9-echelon sword. Su Ming, what a man! Old Yamu stared at the galaxy behind him. As he mumbled, even a hint of respect appeared in his eyes. In the near future, another almighty in life realm in arid triad expanse cosmos will appear. Yamu sighed with a myriad of emotions in his heart, then turned his head around and walked into the distance. Su Xian, with such a son, even if you have to suffer great pain right now, you will still feel gratified. Old Yamu's figure gradually disappeared into the galaxy without a trace. In the fifth kiln, Su Ming stepped into space with Su Hui. In it, he felt as if he had experienced the changes of countless years. Vaguely, he saw Reverend Zilong. He was fighting against some ferocious beasts in another dimension in space. He saw Xian Shang, Yin Yu, and Yin Yu splitting up. He saw Yin Yu screaming shrilly in pain as a fire spirit burned his body and devoured his nascent divinity. He also saw Hua Yu, who was skilled in sealing souls, moving forward cautiously in a swamp. He did not notice that there were a dozen-something pairs of green eyes staring at his back coldly from the swamp behind him. Su Ming also saw Flame Fiend's progenitor holding a battle axe in his hand. He threw his head back and laughed loudly at the sky, loving the battle axe so much that he did not want to part with it. Progenitor Long Hai was also following Xian Shang quietly. There was a cold sneer on his lips, and he had been following them for a long time without Xian Shang noticing it. There was also Zhu Yukai. Su Ming saw that Zhu Yukai was in another dimension at that moment. He was sitting on a mountain and crying while facing the moon. In his hand was a medicinal core. His tears fell down and fell on the ground. When they shattered, Zhu Yukai's murmurs could be heard. I will definitely find the fifth stone, go to the fifth true world, and search for the Abyss Builders. No matter what price I have to pay, I will revive you. Su Ming saw all of this as he moved forward. He could ignore the others, but he remembered Zhu Yukai's life in Nequity Spear and how this person had helped him on the mountain. This was a kindness. Yes, he needed to repay him. Once he remembered Zhu Yukai's words, Su Ming's hair was no longer gray. Instead, it turned yellow. His pupils also turned golden, and the presence spreading out from his body was a vast and indescribable life force. There was also a warmth that caused others to want to get close to him against their will. In this state, even if he did not smile, in everyone's eyes he was smiling. The warmth of that smile was a charm that could cause others to give up on everything and choose to follow him. It was the light of a god that could cause others to be infatuated and worship him. When Su Ming had no idea how much time had passed, when he reached the end of the space, an indistinct layer of fog appeared before him. He could see an edge formed by several spirit trudging platforms in that fog. This was the deepest part of the fifth kiln. It was the edge of the first layer, and once he stepped through it, it would be equivalent to him stepping into the true core of the fifth kiln. Over there, the fifth stone would appear. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1123. Su Ming walked through the air. The spirit trudging platform at the edge of the first layer was not completely empty at that moment. There were a few fire spirits lying on the platform. The color of these fire spirits was rather dull, but the presence spreading out from their bodies was incredibly powerful. Almost at the instant, Su Ming broke through the fog and approached the spirit trudging platform. The fire spirits looked towards him, and a fierce look appeared in their eyes. However, the fierce look in their eyes only lasted for the blink of an eye before disappearing, turning into confusion and screeching. Those who heard those screeching would not be able to sense a hint of malice. Instead, they would feel a slight sense of familiarity. Su Ming smiled. With his long golden hair and golden eyes, he held Su Hui in his arms and walked to the spirit trudging platform. Su Hui's face was already pale. The strength of the fire spirits caused her hair to stand on end. When Su Ming arrived, the fire spirits immediately spread out in all directions. When he stood on the spirit-trudging platform, they sized him up with curious gazes before delighted surprise appeared on their faces. They ran up to him one after another, as if the golden light spreading out from his body made them feel incredibly comfortable. Su Ming lifted his head and ignored the fire spirits. He stared into the distance. Over there was the true core of the fifth kiln. As he watched it, he was just about to take a step forward when his footsteps suddenly came to a halt. Darn it all! In Su Ming's heart, the bald crane's words, which had just woken up, echoed in his mind. What is this light? What is this light? The bald crane immediately screamed. A smile appeared at the corners of Su Ming's lips. He lowered his head to look at his storage bag, and it shone. The bald crane flew out on its own, and when it looked at Su Ming, it widened its eyes. "If you're awake, then come with me," Su Ming said flatly. He did not stay in the place for long. He took a step forward, and in an instant, he left into the distance. He walked straight into the space at the core of the fifth kiln. The bald crane widened its eyes and stared at the golden light on Su Ming's body. Just as it was surprised, roars suddenly came from behind it. When it turned its head around, it immediately saw the fire spirits looking at it with hostile gazes, as if they were about to pounce on it. The bald crane shuddered, and as it screamed, its body swiftly changed. It shone with golden light and turned into a golden bald crane. However, not only did the golden light not make the hostility from the fire spirits disappear, it pierced their eyes, causing them to roar and rush out. "It's not fair!" As the bald crane screamed in pain, it fled swiftly, flapping its wings and charging in the direction Su Ming had left. With great difficulty, it managed to avoid the fire spirit's pursuit, and as it fled, its heart filled with grievance. "Damn it! I just woke up. I just woke up. Why did I encounter something like this? Also, why didn't the golden light work after I conjured it? That's not right. The color I changed into is the same. Could there be something different?" In the midst of its grievance, the light on the bald crane's body continued changing. At one moment, it would be golden, then an earthy yellow, then a waxy yellow, but when it caught up to Su Ming and looked at him again, it immediately froze. Its eyes went wide, and confusion appeared in them, because at that moment, the color of Su Ming's body was no longer golden, but crimson red. His long red hair, red eyes, red long robe, and endless murderous aura, as well as madness spreading out from his entire body, formed a killing intent that surged into the heavens and filled the air, causing the space around it to tremble nonstop. After a long while, Su Ming's expression gradually calmed down. This time, what appeared was no longer gray, gold, or red. Instead, he returned to his normal appearance. He frowned, and as he moved forward in the air, his expression became slightly sullen. "I need to fuse with my real physical body as soon as possible, or else my clone will become slightly unstable." The changes just now were completely out of my control. With just the slightest stimulation, it will change. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes while he was in space. He noticed that there was something wrong with him at that moment. At that moment, his personality seemed to have changed. This change was not something he could control. 3 personalities and 3 clones might seem to be in balance when 3 mountains illuminate the moon fused together. But in truth, he still lacked the most important part of his real self. When I didn't absorb the serendipity and fused with 3 mountains illuminate the moon, I didn't have this sort of emotional fluctuation, but why is it that after 3 mountains illuminate the moon turned into a gigantic moon in lunar Kulpa realm, this happened? Su Ming frowned and charged forward in space. I remember that the Duke of Crimson Flame once mentioned that the Abyss Builders have an incredibly mysterious divine ability that allows them to fuse with all their clones in a unique manner, and they will reach an incredibly terrifying state. I didn't quite understand it in the past, and thought that the fusion of my clones was just like that, but by the looks of it now, could it be that the fusion method I'm using right now is the Abyss Builder's mysterious fusion that the Duke of Crimson Flame once mentioned in the past? A thought appeared in Su Ming's mind. Yet at the instant this thought appeared in his head, a sense of danger suddenly closed in on him. Fog tumbled about in the space beneath Su Ming, and shrill roars came from within it. "Give me back my life." As the roars echoed in space, they were indistinct, piercing, and shrill, drifting words. "Be my companion. Give me back my life." The voices rose and fell, as if countless people were speaking at the same time and saying different things at the same time. As these words echoed in the air, a powerful wave of resentment suddenly appeared in the void. Immediately after, Su Ming saw shadows appearing out of nowhere in the space beneath him. They turned into strange life forms that looked like ghosts. Su Ming could see that there was madness and great resentment on their faces. Once they appeared and saw Su Ming, dark light shone in their eyes, and they charged towards him without a single sound. Almost at the instant Su Ming saw the ghosts, his eyes immediately turned gray. His hair also turned gray, and a thick aura of death erupted from his body without holding anything back. At that moment, Su Ming was cold and merciless. There was not a single hint of emotion in his eyes, and he looked like a dead man. And in the world of the dead, there were no living beings. All living existences were fated enemies. Almost at the instant Su Ming turned gray, he let go of Su Hui's hand. Her heart trembled, and she fell back. At that moment, Su Ming was so unfamiliar to her that it was as if she had never known him before. The aura of death coming from him made her think of death. The aura of death was so thick that it covered the entire space in the blink of an eye. The powerful resentment immediately dissipated, as if they were not on the same level. The bald crane's body came to a screeching halt. Its eyes went wide, and disbelief appeared in its eyes. When it looked at Su Ming, it might not have any feathers on its body, but it still felt as if its hair was standing on end, and its skin crawled. "Darn it all, what's going on?" The bald crane nearly stuttered. As it retreated swiftly, it looked at Su Ming as if it had seen a malicious ghost. Such a thick aura of death. Could it be that he crawled out of hell? Damn it, how could this be? This is... The bald crane shuddered, but an excited light gradually appeared in its eyes. "Ha! The stronger Su Ming is, the more I can bully others as I please and snatch crystals as I please. Bald crane, oh bald crane, you're too great. You actually chose to stay by such a monster's side? You're the person I admire the most." In the midst of the bald crane's excitement, Su Ming, with his gray pupils, was as cold as ice. He lowered his head and cast a flat glance at the space beneath him, at the specters who had originally wanted to rush out, but had come to a stop in shock when the aura of death spread out from Su Ming's body. "All of you shouldn't be alive, even if you were existences with this sort of meaning." When Su Ming said those words coldly, he lifted his right hand and seized the air. Cracking sounds immediately rose into the air, and the life inequity spear appeared. Su Ming held it in his hand, and besides an icy expression, there was no other emotion on his face. In fact, Su Ming's mind was incredibly rational at that moment, and once his rationality reached a certain point, it would turn into callousness. This sort of rationality allowed him to use all sorts of methods as long as he wanted to destroy the existences he wanted to destroy. It could be said to be the complete opposite of Red's madness. As he spoke, Su Ming took a step forward. He was so fast that he instantly closed in on the specters. As they screamed shrilly, gray light shone in Su Ming's eyes. Immediately, cracking sounds rose. The aura of death from Su Ming's body was incredibly cold. As it spread through the area, it instantly covered the entire area. At the instant the specters froze for a moment, Su Ming swung the long spear in front of him. With it, the air roared, and a gigantic moon appeared behind Su Ming. The moon was gray, and when it appeared, the specters' screams of pain became even more shrill. Their aura immediately spread out from their bodies, as if they were about to be wiped off. They wanted to retreat, but when Su Ming swung the life inequity spear, a vortex was formed at the tip of the spear. That vortex affected the area, causing the specters who wanted to retreat to be unable to move. They could only scream in pain and swiftly disappear under the aura of death from a moon. However, there were still some specters who managed to escape the pull of the vortex. Just as they were about to flee, Su Ming patted his storage bag with his left hand, and the gourd appeared. It no longer had 7 eyes, but 8. With a flash, Su Ming chanted an incantation, and 2 small humans flew out to chase after the specters who wanted to flee. The bald crane saw this, and its pupils shrank. It stared at the female of the 2 small humans, and confusion appeared on its face. Darn it all, why are these small humans so familiar? Why do they look like the female gourds I created to take revenge on Luya, to disgust him, and to seduce the small humans in his gourd after I was chased down by him? The bald crane scratched its head in confusion, feeling very surprised. This chapter is supplemented. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1124. His rationality was at its pinnacle, and he was so calm that he was merciless. When he attacked, he would die. In fact, his entire body exuded an endless aura of death, as if he was exercising the right to die in place of hell. This was the gray Su Ming. Once the life inequity spear appeared, the vortex formed in space looked like the path leading to hell. When it was activated, the ghosts who had escaped death but were in a semi-living state were sucked into the vortex while screaming shrilly. They were then sent back into the cycle of reincarnation by the gigantic gray moon behind Su Ming. As for the ghosts who had escaped, they were reduced to ashes with a bang as the 2 small humans from the gourds charged forward. They disappeared without a trace. Everything had just begun, but it had already ended. The gray-haired Su Ming swung the life inequity spear in his hand. Once it turned into a ring, he lifted the gourd, and the 2 small humans from the gourds immediately fell back. They turned into 2 long arcs that fused into the gourd and disappeared without a trace. There were no longer any ghosts roaring in the area. Everything returned to silence. Su Hui stared at Su Ming in a daze, and a chill rose in her heart. The callousness in this person was incredibly clear. It was a person who did not care about all the living. It was a form of pure rationality, a mercilessness that would scatter all emotions on the outside. The destructive power spreading out from the gray moon just now had spread outwards. If she had not noticed it beforehand and retreated, there was a high possibility that she would have been affected by the destructive power. But this was secondary. When Su Hui looked toward Su Ming, she saw the gray pupils in his eyes, and her heart could not help but tremble. Su Ming. Su Hui bit her bottom lip and said softly. However, her voice did not elicit any response from Su Ming. He only cast her a faint glance. The mercilessness in his eyes was as cold as ice. He swept his gaze past her, then turned his head around and took a step towards the space in front of him. Su Hui's face was slightly pale. In silence, she controlled the body of the supreme treasure to follow behind Su Ming. The bald crane had also recovered by then. While mumbling about the gourd it had created in the past, it swept its beady eyes past Su Hui. "Hey, big sister Su, don't think too much about it. It's fine, it's fine." The bald crane flew to Su Hui's side. Once it let out a few fake coughs, it started comforting her. However, the way it comforted her did not sound right. "There's no way I wouldn't understand, little Su. Let me tell you, based on my analysis and the hints Granny Crane gave me, I think that there's something wrong with his mind right now." While following Su Hui, the bald crane gestured with its claws as it spoke. Using the words from my old home, his emotions have been divided into several parts, and he can't control them himself. First, he is easily anged, and when he is angry, gray will appear. Secondly, he's afraid of being stimulated. Once he's stimulated, red will instantly appear, but I'm not too sure what sort of state that golden thing will appear in. The bald crane scratched its head, and with a contemplative look, it sized up Su Ming, who stood before it. "Su time, But that he that could he that was he that he as of he of ming of he of time trickled by. Su Ming had no idea how much time had passed. As he charged forward, he got closer to the core of the fifth kiln. At that moment, a voice suddenly came from the distance. It echoed in the entire fifth kiln in a languid manner. Su. That voice was unprecedentedly strong, so much so that when Su Ming heard it, his body shuddered. He could tell that it was a woman's voice. Once the bald crane heard that voice, it shuddered, and struggle appeared in its eyes. Su Hui's expression changed by the side. She knew that the bald crane had been acting strangely when it heard that voice. At that moment, without any hesitation, she lifted her right hand and swung it. The bald crane immediately turned into a long arc that charged towards Su Hui and fused into the body of the supreme treasure. Only then did the struggle on its face become much fainter. Su, the woman's voice appeared again. This time, there was a hint of urgency in her voice. In fact, Su Ming did not know whether it was just a figment of his imagination, but he heard a hint of a quiver in her voice. A bang went off in Su Ming's head. That voice was unfamiliar to him, but there was also a sense of familiarity to it. It was as if he had heard that voice countless times in the past. Su Ming's long hair changed from gray to black at that moment. The aloof air about him disappeared, and the Su Ming of the past returned to him. He shuddered and stared at the space from which the voice had come. He stared at it quietly. Su Hui also saw Su Ming's recovery and approached him with light steps. She stood beside him and asked in a low voice. Su Ming shook his head. I scared you just now. This wasn't my intention. Once I fused with the moon and lunar Culpa realm, something went wrong with my emotions, Su Ming mumbled. He took a step forward and charged towards the place for which the voice had come. At that moment, there was no longer any calmness or rationality in Su Ming. The only thing left in him was the determination in his heart and the urge formed by the guesses that made him feel uneasy. Su Hui followed Su Ming quietly and walked with him. Time trickled by, and Su Ming's speed increased. The woman's voice echoed in his ears again and again. After an unknown amount of time passed, when Su Ming saw a gigantic altar floating in space in front of him, an endless bang went off in his head. He saw that there was a coffin on the altar. It was a transparent coffin, and he could see that a woman was lying inside it. At the instant he saw the woman, Su Ming felt as if there were 1,000,000 thunderbolts roaring in his body at the same time. He shuddered, and confusion as well as a complicated look appeared in his eyes. This was the core of the fifth kiln, and the altar was the center of it. The coffin on the altar was constantly in space, using the space in the fifth kiln to absorb all the life force from the people, and all of it would be absorbed by the coffin before being sent into the woman's body. This was a rune with the fifth kiln as the rune. Its goal was to continuously send life force into the coffin to ensure that the woman's life force would not be extinguished. As he stared at the woman in the coffin, tears fell from Su Ming's eyes without him realizing it. There was no way he would not know this woman. In his memories in Western Ring Nebula's foreign lands, even when she died, she still hugged the baby in her arms and used her body to protect him. This was a mother. Su Ming's mother. Su Ming shuddered. Tears fell from his eyes as he walked towards the coffin. Su. The woman's voice appeared once again. This time, it was so clear that it sounded as if she was right beside Su Ming's ears, causing more tears to fall from his eyes. The booming sounds in his head became stronger once again. Su Ming air. There was a gentleness in the voice, and there was a warmth that Su Ming was unfamiliar with. It was a mother's longing and care for her own flesh and blood. Don't be afraid. I'm here. Everything will be fine. I promise you that I will continue protecting you until your father and I grow old, until we no longer have the strength to accompany you to the end of your life. Yin air, you have to be strong. Your great-grandfather was the one who gave you your name. He is also filled with hopes for you. No matter what happens, you have to remember that you are an abyss builder under the universe. You're a proud abyss builder. Your father is a powerful warrior who is said to be able to surpass your great-grandfather among the Abyss Builders, and I come from Dark Dawn. The last few sentences did not echo in space, but echoed in Su Ming's soul. They did not come from the present, but from a scene in the past that Su Ming had already forgotten. As of this moment, his mind felt like it was being torn apart, and his mind was reeling. All of these memories came flooding back to him. He remembered that back then, he had been surrounded by darkness, and he had felt very cold. His weak life force couldn't withstand the coldness, and yet there was that voice. Every time he was about to give up his life, that voice continued to encourage him, to let him hear it. At that moment, he understood that at that time, he was still a baby in his mother's womb. After the Abyss Builders were exterminated, he was cursed and nearly died. Vaguely, Su Ming seemed to see a picture. In that picture, the woman lying in the coffin stroked her swollen belly. There was a kind smile on her face, and tears that he could not see fell from her eyes. She was murmuring softly to the baby in her womb. There was also a silent middle-aged man watching this scene quietly. He clenched his fists tightly, and his heart was filled with madness and grief. It was a flame that no one else could see through. The picture changed. When it appeared in Su Ming's mind again, the galaxy had turned into true morning Tao world. The middle-aged man hugged his wife and threw his head back to roar shrilly at the sky. His roar was filled with disappointment towards life, extreme pain that came from his soul, and blood-red tears. 4 great true worlds, you destroyed my entire race and even cursed a baby without sparing him. Now, you took away my wife's life as well. If that's the case, then what's the point of me still living? I lost my home, I lost my lover, I lost my child, but now I'm still alive, and the only reason I'm still alive is to overturn arid triad expanse cosmos. Not only will I make true morning Tao world be built for Abyss, I will also make arid triad expanse cosmos be built for Abyss. If my son doesn't die, then he will no longer be called Su Yun. He will be called Su Ming, and he will carve a script of Abyss that will make all the people in arid triad expanse cosmos tremble. Su Ming lifted his head swiftly. His mind was torn apart amid the booming sounds. Memories rose in his head, and he remembered everything. With tears falling from his eyes, Su Ming went to the altar and arrived beside the coffin. He stood there quietly and stared at his mother's face in the coffin. Su Ming shuddered and knelt down. That face was unfamiliar, but also familiar. He could not tell what sort of thoughts he had at that moment. He only wanted to look at her quietly, just like how she was in the past. Even when she cried, she would still give him gentle encouragement. Just like how she was in the past, even if she had to close her eyes, she would still protect him. This was his mother. This was his mother. Mother, Su Ming mumbled. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1125. Su Ming did not pay any attention to the passing of time. He knelt beside the coffin and stared at his mother inside. There were some stones shining with golden light scattered around the altar and the coffin. Those stones were the 5th stone Su Ming needed. Yet at that moment, Su Ming did not even spare a glance at them. He knelt beside the coffin like a wanderer who had left his mother for a long, long time. One day, when he finally returned home, what he saw was no longer his loving mother waiting for him, but a tombstone. The grief and the tears that flowed down his cheeks were the familial love that Su Ming could not bear to part with even if he had been an orphan his entire life. Su Hui stood by the side. In silence, she came to Su Ming's side and knelt down with him. After a long, long time, Su Ming lifted his head and cast a deep glance at the woman in the coffin again. Then, he slowly stood up. I once thought that I was an orphan without parents. The only ones who accompanied me were the elder, Xiao Hong, and some of my playmates who grew up with me, Su Ming mumbled. Su Hui listened to him quietly by the side. She knew that at that moment, Su Ming did not need someone to talk to him. What he needed was an audience. For the tribe, I could go mad. I could swallow those herbs without a care for my life, so that I could rush out of the room where the elder sealed me in the midst of my madness to fight with my people. I still remember the song of the sun in the past. Tong Tong asked me to go back and told me a secret. I still remember it. There was nostalgia in Su Ming's eyes, along with anguish. But one day, I realized that all of it was fake. There was no dark mountain, no tribe, and even the playmates I grew up with were all a scheme. In fact, I didn't even want to believe that the woman I was infatuated with when I was young was also a farce. Su Ming laughed, and as he laughed loudly. The ninth summit was the home I found in my confusion. It was real, but fate played a trick on me and made me come to the barren lands of divine essence. Only here did I learn that I also had a mother and a father. Su Ming lowered his head. With tears in his eyes, he stared at the woman in the coffin. If having arid triad expanse cosmos build its abyss, and carving the language of the abyss in the universe is also your wish, I will use my entire life to complete it. Su Ming lifted his right hand and seized the air in the direction of the coffin. Immediately, the fifth stone turned into a ray of golden light and flew into his hand. If I went to the fifth true world previously to search for my master, then now I want to see the Abyss Builder's homeland because I'm an Abyss Builder. Su Ming did not say these words out loud, but roared them in his heart. Before that moment, Su Ming might have known that he was an Abyss Builder, but in the depths of his heart, he did not acknowledge this identity too much less acknowledge the Abyss Builders. All the stories were just stories to him. There wasn't much empathy. Yet now, everything was different. His mother's voice and the pictures in Su Ming's mind made him no longer unfamiliar with the Abyss Builders. It was no longer something that did not concern him. It did not matter whether it was the threat from the four great true worlds or his mother's words. All of them made Su Ming take the initiative to acknowledge his identity as an Abyss Builder for the first time. At the instant Su Ming acknowledged its identity, the fifth kiln suddenly started trembling furiously. Wills swiftly descended around Su Ming from all the dimensions in the fifth kiln. They manifested and turned into countless powerful living beings. At the instant the shadows of these living beings appeared, they looked towards Su Ming and bowed to him simultaneously. Among these living beings were trees that were 1,000 feet tall, powerful fire spirits, and all sorts of strange, ferocious beasts. All of them bowed, causing all the dimensions in the fifth kiln to tremble violently. Their wills fused together, and with Su Ming as the center, they formed a gigantic, illusory kiln in space. The kiln was semi-transparent. Flowing light spilled out from it and surrounded Su Ming, causing him to look as if he had become the core of the illusory kiln. As light shone, Su Ming sensed the fifth kiln's acknowledgement towards him. At that moment, there were no loud bangs, and neither were there any changes that shook the sky and earth, but Su Ming knew that he had already become the master of the fifth kiln. As the fifth kiln trembled, all the dimensions in it looked as if the sky had collapsed and the earth had shattered. At the instant all the wills of the living beings arrived, all the people in the kiln sensed the powerful change, but they did not know the reason behind it. Xianshang had a firm grip on the ground so that his body could be fixed in place so that he would not be sucked away by the gigantic vortex that had suddenly appeared in the sky. Huayu's face was pale. As he laughed brokenly, he lay in a sea of flowers. His body was buried in the soil, and most of it had already melted, turning into nutrients to nourish the sea of flowers. By his side, Progenitor Long Hai stared at Huayu with a smile. His body was originally a nascent divinity, but at that moment it was filled with flowers, as if it was about to gather together to form a new body. Flame Fiend's progenitor was charging through a dimension at that moment. In shock, he lifted his head to look at the sky. He saw that it was swaying violently. Reverend Zilong's expression was incredibly sour. He stared at an island in the sea that was only thousands of feet away from him. There was a tree on that island, and there was a crimson fruit on it. Yet now, as the ground in the dimension trembled and the mountain swayed, the spot where the tree was collapsed. If there was anyone in the crowd who could tell what was going on, then there was only one person, Zhu Yukai. At that moment, Zhu Yukai stood on a mountain. As it rumbled and swayed, the clouds in the sky tumbled about. The entire world changed, and Zhu Yukai's expression changed swiftly. This is the fifth kiln acknowledging its master. Could it be that there are abyss builders among these people? At the same time, the continent where dust burners resided beyond the fifth kiln had long since returned to normal. But at that instant, all the dust burners threw their heads back and roared. Their bodies changed on their own to turn into fire spirits. This had nothing to do with their levels of cultivation. Even dust burners' tribe leader and progenitor could not control their bodies and turn into fire spirits. As they roared, a voice that came from their souls rang out in the minds of all dust burners. The fifth kiln has acknowledged its master. Once dust burner's progenitor turned into a fire spirit, a brilliant light shone in his eyes. In the space at the core of the fifth kiln, Su Ming sensed that the fifth kiln had acknowledged him as its master at that moment. It moved according to his will. Su Ming remained silent for a moment before he lifted his right hand and swung his arm. Immediately, the shadow of the kiln surrounding him disappeared. The countless existences in the dimensions around him also disappeared, causing the area to return to normal. When Su Ming turned around, he took a step into space. The coffin was still on the altar. In the future, there would still be a large amount of power of time that would be sucked into the coffin to nourish the woman, and one day, under the effects of the rune, she would wake up. If Su Ming wanted to, he could take the fifth kiln with him, but he did not do so. He would stay in the place and continue attracting more powerful warriors over. Only by doing so could he make the rune continue. Only by doing so could his mother wake up one day. He stepped into space. At the instant Su Ming disappeared, he brought Su Hui out of the fifth kiln and stepped into the galaxy. When he turned his head back, he found that the fifth kiln was still in the galaxy. Everything he had experienced in it was like a dream. He sighed softly, but almost at the moment he did so, a ray of golden light shot out from his storage bag, causing the area around Su Ming to immediately turn golden. That golden light was different from the golden light Su Ming had turned into. There was a vast power spreading out from it, and it seemed to possess a vague feeling as if it could attract the power of the world to gather on it. There was also a presence about it that seemed to be incompatible with divine essence Star Ocean. It was as if its appearance would immediately be noticed by the universe in divine essence Star Ocean, and it would be rejected by the galaxy. Su Ming was momentarily stunned. When he lowered his head to look at his storage bag, he immediately sensed that the fifth stone he had brought out was shining with a golden light that reached 100,000 feet. With a bang, it forcefully flew out of Su Ming's storage bag. It was as if once this item left the fifth kiln, it would definitely not be able to exist in the storage bag. Once it flew out, it did not leave into the distance. Instead, it floated around Su Ming and continued circling around him. When the fifth stone appeared, the galaxy trembled. The golden light continued spreading out in all directions, and when it reached a point where there was no end to it, a disaster that could stir up divine essence Star Ocean appeared because of it. The dust burners who had turned into fire spirits had just recovered when progenitor's heart shuddered. He could clearly sense a power that was completely different from that of divine essence Star Ocean. In fact, it was a power that did not fit in with the barren lands of divine essence. It came swiftly from the fifth kiln. The fifth stone. Progenitor immediately lifted his head. At the same time, in the core of divine essence Star Ocean was the territory belonging to the Rongwu race. It was originally dark, but at the instant the fifth stone's presence spread out, countless eyes opened in the darkness. Within each pair of eyes was a madness akin to that of a wild beast. The fifth stone. Another fifth stone has appeared. Snatch it. We must snatch it. Muffled, buzzing sounds echoed in the darkness, and the madness in the eyes immediately reached its peak. The virtue roosters, the race with the bodies of snakes and heads of humans, were in the karst caves of the planets they resided in. At that moment, they opened their eyes at the same time. As hisses echoed in the air, a great wolf filled the entire planet. Search for the fifth stone based on this presence that does not fuse with divine essence star ocean. Bring that stone to me. If you like this work, you are welcome to give me a recommendation vote or a monthly vote. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1126. Dust burners were the only ones who remained silent among the 4 alien races. Heaven traversers might have sensed the presence of the fifth stone, but their progenitor only opened his eyes while he sat cross-legged before he closed them again. He did not snatch the fifth stone like he did in the past. He knew that every single time the fifth stone appeared, the presence that did not fuse with the universe would sweep through the entire divine essence star ocean and cause countless ferocious beasts to fight over it. Once they snatched the fifth stone, they could use it to head to the mysterious fifth true world. The legends regarding the fifth true world have been circulating in divine essence star ocean for a long time. After all, the fifth kiln had flown out of the fifth true world. Based on the supreme treasures in it, it could be seen just how alluring the mysterious fifth true world was. Besides, the fifth true world had already become empty. It was an empty galaxy, and the serendipity that could be obtained there was incredibly great. Even if they did not choose to go to the fifth true world, as long as they had the fifth stone, they could make 2 choices. One of them was to hand it over to the guardian races of the fifth ocean, and they would use a high price to exchange for it. The second choice was to refine the fifth stone and fuse it into an enchanted treasure. With its power that did not fuse with the laws in it, they could create a supreme treasure that could cut through laws. It was not that there were no such supreme treasures in divine essence star ocean, but most of them were inherited items from various races. It was just like Heaven Traverser's third eye. When it was created in the past, it had been fused with the fifth stone. These 3 temptations were enough to stir up a crazed fight for it, and a disaster every single time the fifth stone appeared. It would be a bloodbath. The ferocious beasts and races in the core of divine essence star ocean were not the only ones who sensed the fifth stone's appearance. During that instant, all the races and ferocious beasts in the inner and outer parts of the galaxy sensed the appearance of the stone. In fact, some of the sleeping ancestral spirits opened their eyes under the stimulation of the presence. The booming sounds from all the regions in divine essence star ocean reached an incredibly intense level at that moment. The fifth stone, the ground in one of the planets collapsed, and a gigantic hand rose from the depths of the ground. It clenched its fist, and a giant crawled out. That giant had 2 heads, and it threw its head back and roared at the same time. The fifth stone has appeared again. A faint voice echoed in the air from a pile of dust and ruins in the galaxy. A strange, semi-transparent creature slowly manifested. When it looked into the distance, its body flickered and completely disappeared. Scenes like this were playing out in various locations throughout the starry sky, and all of them were pointing toward the fifth stone. During that instant, Su Ming also noticed the ripples of power from the fifth stone that did not fuse with the world. A glint appeared in his eyes, and he understood why Tian Xiezi had been chased down by the 4 great alien races because of the fifth stone. In fact, there were definitely other races and ferocious beasts who had chased after him as well. A stone like this. Su Ming stared at the fifth stone. When it was in the kiln, it was inconspicuous, but when it was in the world outside, it was as dazzling as the sun because it did not belong to this expanse cosmos. Because of that, while it was not tolerated by this expanse cosmos, it also became a sharp weapon that could fight against the laws of this expanse cosmos. Such a fifth stone would definitely be coveted by everyone. It doesn't matter whether it's Heaven Traverser's progenitor or dust burners. None of them told me the truth. As for Dgyo Shah, with his level of cultivation, it's impossible for him to know much about the fifth stone. It's no wonder why this treasure would stir up a fight. After remaining silent for a moment, Su Ming formed a seal with his right hand and pointed at the fifth stone, but the stone did not budge. It continued moving to Su Ming's side and shining with golden light. It cannot be put away into his storage bag. Su Ming frowned, and a fierce glare appeared in his eyes. He opened his mouth and sucked in a sharp breath in the direction of the fifth stone. The stone shuddered and swiftly flew into Su Ming's mouth. In an instant, he swallowed it, and golden light immediately spread out from his body. After some time, it slowly disappeared. However, this was only a temporary suppression. It would not be long before the stone flew out again. Su Ming was able to do this because his soul was that of an abyss builder, and the abyss builders and the fifth stone both came from the fifth true world. If Su Ming's real physical body was around, he would be able to completely contain the fifth stone without revealing a single ripple of power. But as of then, he could not do this for long. After remaining silent for a moment, Su Ming cast a glance at the fifth kiln, then pointed at it. With it, booming sounds immediately came from within the kiln. It started trembling, and as it did so, a large amount of sea of fire spread out from within, causing the kiln to look as if it was burning. Immediately after, several figures were swept away by the impact of the flames and pushed out of the kiln. Among them were Xian Shang, Reverend Zilong, Flame Fiend's progenitor, and Progenitor Long Hai, whose body was no longer an illusion. The last to appear was Zhu Yu Kai. These people were the survivors. At that moment, as the fifth kiln trembled, they were forcefully expelled from the dimensions where they were. Once they left the fifth kiln, their expressions were different, and they looked towards Su Ming. These people were already close to the edge of the first layer in the fifth kiln and had sent out a large amount of life force. Su Ming did not feel at ease if they continued staying there, which was why he decided to control the fifth kiln and chase all of them out. Su Ming swept his gaze past the crowd before his gaze landed on Zhu Yu Kai. Zhu Yu Kai also looked at Su Ming. When their gazes met, Zhu Yu Kai's eyes lit up swiftly. "Flame Fiend," Su Ming said faintly. Flame Fiend's progenitor's eyes sparkled. When he looked towards Su Ming, he took a few steps back. He might have left the fifth kiln, but he was incredibly weak at that moment. His wariness towards Su Ming did not decrease, but instead increased. "I promise to give you this corpse. Now take it." As Su Ming spoke, he patted his storage bag with his right hand. Immediately, the corpse of the white-robed teenager that was the centipede appeared in front of him. Su Ming flung it towards Flame Fiend's progenitor. Flame Fiend's progenitor was momentarily stunned. After a moment of hesitation, he looked towards Su Ming. Su Ming's expression remained the same. Not a single change could be detected. In the midst of hesitation, Flame Fiend's progenitor watched the corpse approach him. He could not guess Su Ming's thoughts and did not know whether there was some sort of trap waiting for him in the corpse. But if he gave up just like this, it would be incredibly difficult for him to find another corpse in Mastery Realm. At that moment, Flame Fiend's progenitor gritted his teeth and thought to himself that Su Ming should not kill him. Even if he had other intentions, he must have taken a fancy to Flame Fiend's progenitor because of his level of cultivation. Hence, resolve appeared in his eyes. With one move, he charged towards the white-robed teenager's corpse. To him, the white-robed teenager's corpse was much stronger than his previous physical body. By the looks of it, not only had he not suffered any losses, he had even gained his serendipity. But at the instant he closed in on the white-robed teenager's corpse, Reverend Zilong took a step forward and instantly appeared beside the corpse. He lifted his right hand and swung his arm. Flame Fiend's progenitor's expression changed swiftly, and he swiftly retreated. "Fellow Taoist Zilong, what is the meaning of this?" Flame Fiend's progenitor immediately screamed shrilly. "This person is a guest of the four great true worlds. I will be bringing his corpse back," Reverend Zilong said flatly. He did not look towards the Flame Fiends, but at Su Ming. "That is my spoil of war." Su Ming frowned and looked at Reverend Zilong before speaking flatly. Besides a few people from the four great true worlds, he did not have a single shred of goodwill towards the others. At that moment, as his words were aloof, his hair gradually turned gray. "Oh. Then I would like to see whether your spoil of war will belong to you." A brilliant light shone in Reverend Zilong's eyes. He did not care whether he would bring the white-robed teenager's corpse back to the four great true worlds, and neither would he care about it. What he cared about was that this person had the blood of ancient Wu coursing through his veins. If that was the case, if he refined his physical body and could gather up a hint of ancient Wu's blood, then his trip to the fifth kiln this time would not have been in vain. That was why he was determined to have this corpse. As he spoke, he patted the white-robed teenager's corpse with his right hand and put it away into his storage bag. Then, he looked at Su Ming coldly. This scene caused the expressions of the people in the area to remain still. Xianshang took a few careful steps back. As he narrowed his eyes, he stared at Su Hui, at the body of the supreme treasure on her body, and a barely noticeable resentment and coldness appeared in his eyes. Zhu Yukai did not speak. His expression remained the same, and no one could tell what he was thinking. As for Flame Fiend's progenitor, his expression was dark, but he knew that even if he had a physical body, he would still not be Reverend Zilong's opponent, which was why he could only grit his teeth and bear with it. At that moment, Su Ming's hair had already turned completely gray. This change was immediately seen by the people, especially Reverend Zilong. His pupils shrank in a barely noticeable manner. At that moment, Su Ming suddenly gave him an incredibly dangerous feeling. It was a presence of death, a chill that made him feel as if midwinter had arrived. This feeling caused his cultivation base to instantly gather together, and a glint appeared in his eyes. The gray Su Ming symbolized extreme rationality and the power of hell. He did not care about his methods, only whether he would succeed or not. Long Hai, if you still don't attack, I will immediately crush your oath and make you lose your soul, Su Ming said coldly, and his gaze immediately swept towards Zhu Yukai. Fellow Taoist Chong He, it is not impossible for me to resurrect your wife. Flame Fiend's progenitor, this is your physical body. Since I have already given it to you, it has nothing to do with me anymore. I will help you attack, but you will also have to fight with your life on the line. Su Ming's flat words immediately caused the expressions of Long Hai, Zhu Yukai, and Flame Fiend's progenitor to change. Reverend Zilong's heart let out a thump, and his expression changed drastically. A monstrous, fierce glare appeared in Zhu Yukai's eyes. At that moment, he looked as if he had gone mad. His eyes instantly turned bloodshot, and once he glared at Su Ming, he immediately turned his head around, and powerful killing intent appeared in his eyes. His cultivation base erupted from his body, and he looked towards Reverend Zilong. Long Hai's expression changed, and hostility also appeared on his face as he stared at Zilong. As for Flame Fiend's progenitor, his nascent divinity surged. Killing intent shone on his face, and flames swiftly erupted from his nascent divinity. The three of them split into three directions. When they surrounded Reverend Zilong, the gray-haired Su Ming lifted his right hand, and the life inequity spear appeared with a buzz. A freezing glare appeared in Su Ming's eyes as he asked coldly, "This is my spoil of war. Are you going to give it to me or not?" To be continued. If you like this work, please come Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 11:27. Reverend Zilong's expression changed several times. His gaze focused on Su Ming, and after a moment, he looked at the other three people around him. Su Ming's one sentence had immediately turned the situation around and turned him into the public enemy. It made him feel as if there was a needle on his back, and he could not get off. Flame Fiend's progenitor was still manageable, and Reverend Zilong did not pay much attention to him. But progenitor Long Hai was an almighty who had been famous for many years. Even if he was just a nascent divinity and was not at the peak of his condition, when he worked together with Flame Fiend's progenitor, he could be considered as a complete threat. And at that moment, progenitor Long Hai did not seem to be a nascent divinity to Reverend Zilong. Then there was Zhu Yukai. Reverend Zilong originally did not pay much attention to Zhu Yukai. Even if this person had attacked to save Su Ming when he was in the mountain with the mountain shifter art, Reverend Zilong had the means to do so, which was why he had only cast him a sidelong glance and placed his position slightly higher in his heart. What truly caused his heart to let out a thump against his chest was the name Su Ming had called him just then. It was not Zhu Yu Kai, but Chang He. At the instant Reverend Zi Long heard that name, only one person appeared in his mind: the disciple of true, sacred Yin World's sublime paragon, the future culpal lord of true, sacred Yin World. War immortal Chang He, an almighty in life realm who looked down on the world. But due to the estrangement between him and his master, they turned against each other, and he was exiled to Divine Essence Star Ocean. Zilong, who had been in the barren lands of Divine Essence for many years, had heard of Chang He's name before, but he had never been able to find any clues about him in the barren lands of Divine Essence. Yet right then, at the instant he heard Su Ming's words, the shock in Reverend Zilong's heart was difficult to describe. He stared at Zhu Yu Kai, and after a long while, he shifted his gaze to Su Ming. The gray Su Ming made him feel great wariness. This wariness did not come from his level of cultivation, but from his control over his thoughts. With just 3 sentences, Su Ming had caused him to fall into such a state, and he became uncertain. This was a battle between almighties, and he had yet to attack, yet he was already afraid and hesitant. Because of that, there was no need for him to continue fighting. He would definitely lose. It had been a very long time since Reverend Zilong had felt this aggrieved. This feeling was not the same as when he was sneak attacked when he fought with Huang Mei for the precious treasure, but the humiliation of being threatened yet unable to struggle or resist. A freezing glare shone in his eyes. The area was silent. Su Ming looked at Zilong coldly and did not say another word. The whole situation was on the verge of exploding. To fight or not to fight? If I fight, I have no chance of winning. But if I don't fight and leave just like that, my reputation will be ruined. Reverend Zilong's heart was conflicted. As he hesitated, his heart trembled, and another epiphany instantly appeared in his mind. What a good coercion! If I fight, I don't have the confidence to win. If I don't fight, then this matter will leave a mark at the bottom of my heart. It will make me hesitate, and it will stop me from stepping into Fate Realm. Unfortunately, I was the one who brought all of this upon myself. Reverend Zilong gritted his teeth, and an intense fighting spirit flashed in his eyes. He no longer hesitated. This battle, he was going to fight. However, at the instant he decided to continue fighting, ripples of power appeared on Zhu Yu Kai and the other two's bodies at the same time. When the vicious battle was about to begin, Su Ming suddenly spoke. "Do you want this item?" As Su Ming spoke, he lifted his right hand. Immediately, a small hole that looked as if it had been stung by a poisonous wasp appeared on his palm. A thick fragrance spread out from it. At the instant it spread out, Su Ming clenched his fist, causing the fragrance to immediately disappear. However, the instant the fragrance spread out, it was enough to make Zilong's expression change drastically. The fighting spirit in his eyes immediately became chaotic again under the impact of the fragrance. He was not the only one. Zhu Yu Kai also lifted his head swiftly. Once he cast Su Ming a glance, he lowered his head and no longer paid any attention to him. As for progenitor Long Hai, a glint appeared in his eyes, but he did not speak. As for Flame Fiend's progenitor, he remained silent. What is the meaning of this? What is this fragrance? Zilong's expression changed. He had only taken a whiff of the fragrance just then, and his cultivation base had immediately started circulating on its own. The change in his cultivation base caused his heart to pound in excitement. Leave behind your spoils of war and be my bodyguard for a year. I'll give you 10 times the amount of fragrance I gave you just now. This is my oath, Su Ming said faintly. This was a way out of the situation. Reverend Zilong's expression turned dark. After some time, he lifted his right hand and swung in the air. Immediately, the white-robed teenager's corpse was brought out from his storage bag and floated in front of Su Ming. If he could avoid fighting, Zilong would not want to. I will remember your oath. Guard me for a year in exchange for 10 times the amount of fragrance I gave you just now. This is a deal. Once Reverend Zilong finished speaking, he cast a cold glance at the other 3 people beside him. I can give you the corpse. Su Ming's expression remained the same. and he looked towards Flame Fiend's progenitor. "Guard me for a year. I will definitely complete this task," Flame Fiend's progenitor quickly said. What he feared the most was that Su Ming would give him the corpse without telling him the karma involved. This caused him to be incredibly conflicted. Right then, when he saw that Su Ming had already stated his conditions, he immediately agreed to it. He was afraid that Su Ming would go back on his word, so he quickly swore an oath to the universe as an almighty. "I left a seal on the corpse. Go and fuse with it," Su Ming said faintly. This time, a resolute look appeared on Flame Fiend's progenitor's face. He turned into a long arc and charged towards the white-robed teenager's corpse. In an instant, he fused with it, and, as the corpse shuddered, purple flames spread out. The flames burned the corpse, causing it to gradually dry up. In fact, it was continuously shrinking. By the looks of it, it still needed some time before it could completely occupy the corpse. "Guard me for a year, and I will give you your freedom." Su Ming turned his head around and looked at Progenitor Long Hai. Progenitor Long Hai remained silent for a moment before he swore an oath in response to Su Ming's request. "1 year later, I will give you the hope of reviving your wife." The final person Su Ming looked towards was Zhu Yukai. Zhu Yukai stared at Su Ming. After a long while, he nodded. For the hope of reviving his wife, he could give up everything. Su Ming lifted his head to look at the galaxy. His long gray hair slowly changed. When it returned to normal, a glint appeared in his eyes. He took a step forward and turned into a long arc that charged into the distance. Su Hui immediately followed behind him. The others also followed in silence. Flame Fiend's progenitor had also finished fusing with his physical body, and, as he charged forward, he followed behind Su Ming. Only Xianshang was left. His expression was dark and constantly changing. As he stared at the group leaving into the distance, a sinister look appeared in his eyes. "I wonder what this person's goal is for needing so many almighties to protect him. But none of this has anything to do with me anymore. However, you stole Xian family's supreme treasure. I will definitely make you pay for this." The hatred in Xianshang's eyes was incredibly deep. With a cold harumph in his heart, he turned around. Just as he was about to leave, his body suddenly shuddered, and the fifth kiln was activated once again. As flames spread out, a huge suction force was sent out, causing Xianshang to be unable to fight back in the slightest. He was swiftly sucked into the fifth kiln once again. The galaxy around him gradually calmed down. "Su Hui, I want to go to an unknown place." "You." As Su Ming charged forward in the galaxy, he sent a divine thought to Su Hui, who was beside him. "The fifth true world, huh?" Su Hui asked calmly. Su Ming turned his head around and cast her a glance. He did not speak. As he charged forward, the group behind him also fell silent. Time trickled by. Several days later, the galaxy in front of him was surrounded by a thick layer of fog. Su Ming came to a stop beyond it. Su Hui knew that this was the region where Dustburner's tribe was located. Almost at the same time Su Ming and the others arrived, the fog in that region tumbled about violently. An indistinct figure walked out of the fog. When he approached the group, his body was no longer an illusion, but had gained corporeal form. He turned into Dustburner's progenitor. His gaze swept past Su Ming and Zilong and the other three behind him. In the end, he wrapped his fist in his palm and bowed to Su Ming in silence. He was bowing to the current master of the fifth kiln. "Progenitor, please send her to the periphery of the barren lands of divine essence." Su Ming cast a glance at Su Hui, then at Dustburner's progenitor. He, too, wrapped his fist in his palm and bowed to him. Dustburner's progenitor lifted his head and looked at Su Hui before he nodded. Su Hui remained silent for a moment before she asked softly, "You insist on going alone? Go back. Wait for me at the entrance of the forces of power from the four great true worlds, keeping a lookout over the barren lands," Su Ming said calmly. Su Hui was silent. She sighed softly and did not continue speaking. "I'll have to trouble you, progenitor." Su Ming bowed again. "Don't worry, I will ensure your safety. If you truly reach that place, remember that there is a place called Burning Dust Planet. It's said that it is the origin of the fire spirits. Bring me a handful of soil from that place. Also, you have the fifth stone. Be careful. Dust Burner's progenitor sent these words into Su Ming's mind with his divine thought. When he saw Su Ming nod, he swung his arm and immediately turned into a burning cloud of fire that swept up Su Hui's body. In an instant, he charged into the distance, but at that moment, a sharp scream traveled into the air. Damn you, old man. I don't want to go back. Dust Burner's progenitor let out a cold harumph from the cloud of fire. At the same time, a long arc flew out from the cloud of fire and turned into the bald crane. It swiftly returned to Su Ming's side. When the bald crane returned, it could not see Su Hui's gaze as she stared at Su Ming from the cloud of fire that was swept up. That gaze gradually left into the distance until it disappeared into the galaxy, ending their companionship of nearly 100 years. Su Ming also stared at the fire cloud that was leaving into the distance. When the cloud could no longer be seen, he turned around, and his long hair had turned gray. His pupils had also turned gray, and there was no longer any emotion on him. My fellow Taoists, in the next year, there will definitely be a fierce battle. My promise to you is as eternal as this galaxy. I will definitely not go back on my word. During this year, I will have to trouble all of you. Su Ming looked at Zilong and the others with a cold gaze. He wrapped his fist in his palm and bowed to them. Since you're a guard, you have to tell us the reason, Progenitor Longhai suddenly said. Chapter 1, to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1128. Su Ming cast a glance at Progenitor Longhai. His gaze was cold and merciless. Progenitor Longhai also looked at Su Ming. Their gazes met for a moment, and Progenitor Longhai chose to avoid it. Zilong's expression might seem as calm as ever, but he was also staring at Su Ming. Clearly, he also wanted to know why Su Ming had asked them to protect him. Flame Fiend's progenitor was much less curious. This did not match his personality in the past, but ever since he met Su Ming, the repeated encounters had caused his wariness towards Su Ming to seep into his bones. When he faced Su Ming, Flame Fiend's progenitor only had one simple thought. He would not fight back, refuse, or be greedy, as long as there was no problem with the physical body he was supposed to obtain. Compared to the three of them, Zhu Yukai was even calmer. Even if Su Ming had some sort of supreme treasure in his hands, unless it was something that could resurrect his wife, he would not be interested in it. Even his life inequity spear had been given to someone else. There was no other supreme treasure in the world that could tempt him. He also knew that Su Ming knew about his background. Asking him to protect him was only secondary. The true reason was probably to hold back the others. Su Ming stared at Progenitor Longhai, who had avoided his gaze. He opened his mouth coldly, and a layer of golden light instantly flew out from his mouth. When it surrounded him, it turned into the fifth stone. Once it appeared, the universe in the area immediately roared. The air distorted, and ripples spread out in all directions. A presence that did not tolerate anything in the expanse cosmos erupted from the fifth stone. When the stone appeared, Progenitor Longhai's pupil shrank. This is the fifth stone, Progenitor Longhai immediately said. The fifth stone. Reverend Zilong's expression also changed. He stared at the fifth stone, and a hint of hesitation appeared on his face, but soon he calmed down. He knew that he could not keep this item. Even if he snatched it, he could not bring it out of Divine Essence Star Ocean, and more importantly, he did not have the confidence to snatch it away in this place. Flame Fiend's progenitor licked his lips and forced down the instinctive greed that rose in his heart. If this item had been in someone else's possession, he might have had other thoughts, but since it was in Su Ming's hands, his greed was immediately extinguished. Zhu Yukai's expression was the calmest. He first looked at the fifth stone, then at Su Ming. Suddenly, a barely noticeable smile appeared at the corners of his lips. He knew that if Su Ming dared to bring out the fifth stone and let him see it, and had even said that there was hope for his wife to be resurrected, then it meant one thing. He's an abyss builder. When Zhu Yukai remembered the fifth kiln acknowledging him as its master, everything immediately became clear in his heart. "You have to stop all those who come to snatch my fifth stone," Su Ming said flatly. "Flame Fiend's progenitor, your new physical body surpasses your previous body. Is this price enough for you? Patriarch Long Hai, it doesn't matter if it's 1,000 years or 10,000 years. You can fulfill your oath in a year. Is that enough for you?" Su Ming looked towards Reverend Zilong. "But for this sea, it doesn't seem to be enough," Zilong said indifferently. "That's the god Ascension Nectar." Su Ming's expression was calm, but at the instant he said those words, his voice did not echo in space. Instead, his divine thought echoed in Reverend Zilong's mind. At the instant Zilong heard the words God Ascension Nectar, his body jolted. When he lifted his head to stare at Su Ming, a strange light appeared in his eyes. After a long while, he nodded solemnly. Su Ming looked towards Zhu Yukai. He did not speak. Once their gazes met, they averted their gazes. Sometimes, there was no need for a direct explanation. They could understand each other. When he turned around, Su Ming turned into a long arc and charged forward. The group followed behind him and headed towards the end of the galaxy. Days passed. 10 days later, Su Ming found the fifth ocean in the depths of Divine Essence Star Ocean based on the Jade Slip Dustburner's progenitor had given him in the past. It was an ocean that existed in the galaxy. Even if the waves had not come close, the booming sounds could be heard in the galaxy. This ocean existed in the galaxy, and there was no end to it. This strange side of the galaxy was incredibly difficult to see in the outside world besides Divine Essence Star Ocean. If there was an ocean, then there would definitely be a beach. At the edge of the ocean, countless planets had shattered and turned into shattered stones that surrounded them, forming a dazzling beach. If anyone took a closer look, they would be able to see clearly that the ocean was not actually water, but a layer of dark blue powder. It gathered together and floated about like a presence, causing all those who saw it to feel as if they were looking at the ocean from a distance. Booming sounds continued echoing in space, and they would never disappear. Su Ming stood on a shattered stone near the fifth ocean. As he stared at the ocean, the fifth stone that surrounded him erupted with a brilliant light. That light turned into a long arc that charged straight into the fifth ocean. It shot forward, causing the ocean in the area to tumble about and tumble backwards, turning into a tunnel in a vortex. The depths of the tunnel were so deep that even Su Ming could not see its end. It was connected to the long arc. Booming sounds reverberated in space, and the entire galaxy started trembling. Su Ming was silent. Based on the introduction in the Jade Slip, when the fifth stone appeared in the fifth ocean, it would open a tunnel on its own. It was a path that led to the fifth true world. This tunnel would need 1 year before it could be completely opened. Once it was opened, it would instantly close up, and during that instant, people could move through it. 1 year. Su Ming lifted his right hand, and the life inequity spear appeared. Once he held it in his hand, he thrust it at the shattered stone beneath him. With a bang, the spear stabbed into the stone, and Su Ming sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes. At the instant he closed his eyes, Zhu Yukai also sat down cross-legged beside Su Ming. He knew his mission. He was not protecting the fifth stone, but Su Ming. Flame Fiend's progenitor also found a shattered stone not too far away and sat down to meditate, waiting for the fierce battle that would definitely happen next. Progenitor Long Hai was silent for a moment before he chose a shattered stone that was slightly further away. Once he sat down, he lifted his head and stared at the galaxy. No one knew what he was thinking. Reverend Zilong stood there with his eyes closed and did not move, but Su Ming's words from 10 days ago were still echoing in his heart. God Ascension Nectar. There's no mistaking it. That's definitely God Ascension Nectar. Only this legendary item that has already gone extinct would have such a thick fragrance. It could make my cultivation base tremble with just a whiff of it. Time trickled by, and in the blink of an eye, half a month went by. During that time, besides booming sounds, there were no other sounds in the area around the fifth ocean. No one came either, but the more it was so, the more wary the people became. During that half a month, Su Ming did not move. He did not open his eyes either, as if he was in deep sleep. He quietly waited for time to pass for the people who would definitely appear to snatch the nectar to arrive. In the blink of an eye, another 15 days passed. On the final day of the first of the 12 months of the year, Zhu Yu Kai, who had been meditating, was the first to open his eyes. After a moment, the ripples of his cultivation base spread out from Zilong's body while he fought. When he opened his eyes, he looked into the distance. Behind him was Progenitor Long Hai, and the last to notice, it was Flame Fiend's progenitor. Almost at the instant Flame Fiend's progenitor opened his eyes, violent, booming sounds came from the galaxy in the distance. A long arc charged forward, and within it was a gigantic meteor that was about 10,000 feet big. It was scraping against space as it charged towards them. Standing on the meteor was a big man. He was about 30 feet tall, and his upper body was bare. As his hair fluttered in the wind, a brilliant light shone in his eyes. Behind him was an earthen yellow tail. It was wrapped around his body, causing him to look incredibly strange and enchanting. His eyes were not the color of a normal person's, but yellow. His pupils were vertical. When he closed in, he saw Zilong and the others at first glance. His pupils shrank, and the meteor under him stopped 10,000 feet away. He stared coldly at Su Ming, who was surrounded by Zilong and the others, and at the dazzling fifth stone in front of him. A hint of greed shone in his eyes, but he did not act recklessly. Instead, he sat down cross-legged on the meteor and stared at it coldly. Zilong frowned. He might be a wild and untamed person, but he placed great importance on oaths. Since he had promised to protect Su Ming for a year, and the price Su Ming offered was enough to tempt him, he would not have any other thoughts. Of course, this was also because Su Ming's level of cultivation was enough for him to place great importance on him. He could also tell that there was a strange connection between Su Ming and Zhu Yu Kai's extraordinariness. Because of that, there was no benefit to him from the backlash. It would be better for him to use the normal method to complete their agreement. Fellow Taoist Long Hai, a year is not long, but it is short. It is just enough time for us to meditate, but it will not be easy. This person's level of cultivation is about the same as yours. Are you willing to warm up? Zilong asked faintly. Why wouldn't I be willing? Progenitor Long Hai stood up and laughed. Once he stretched his body, flowers immediately appeared on his nascent divinity. They swiftly spread out to cover his entire body, making him look as if he had a physical body. With a sway of his body, he turned into a whirling flower and charged toward the burly man on the meteor that was 10,000 feet away. The man's pupils shrank as he stood up, and a ferocious smile appeared on his lips. He did not want to fight, but to wait. Even if the guards had extraordinary power, he believed that as time passed and more people came to this place, their power would not be able to withstand a single blow. With a bang, the two of them swiftly fought against each other. As loud booming sounds reverberated in space, impact spread in all directions. Less than the time it takes for half an incense stick to burn had passed. Suddenly, long arcs charged over from the galaxy in the distance. This time, there was not just one, but nearly 100 of them. Within each long arc was a living being from Divine Essence Star Ocean. Some of them were in the form of humans, and some of them were in the form of wild beasts. As they closed in, they were incredibly quick, but there were no almighties among them. Flame Fiend's progenitor let out a cold harumph. Without needing anyone to give him any orders, he moved forward and immediately stirred up a purple sea of fire that swept through the area with the 100 long arcs. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1129. The fifth true world was activated in the second month of the year. During that month, booming sounds surged into the sky above the fifth ocean. The sounds of battle reverberated in all directions, and a thick, bloody stench spread out, turning the place into a land of disaster. Progenitor Long Hai had not returned from the moment he attacked, and it was the same for Flame Fiend's progenitor. Living beings continued arriving and continued fighting, causing Reverend Z Long to attack without any hesitation. Right then, there were only 3 days left in the second month, but the battles in the place had reached an incredibly intense state. The person fighting against Reverend Z Long was a two-headed giant. His power was so great that it was practically equal to Z Long's. Their divine abilities rumbled in the galaxy, and they were evenly matched. Besides the man from before, there was also an old woman beside Progenitor Long Hai. As the three of them fought against each other, booming sounds shook the sky and earth. As for the ferocious beasts and people from other races in Divine Essence Star Ocean, they were fought against by Flame Fiend's progenitor alone. There were no Almighties among them, but there were quite a number of them in Solar Culpa Realm. Besides, there were nearly 1,000 of them, and only the sea of fire from Flame Fiend's progenitor could surround them, preventing them from rushing out. Time passed, and soon the second month was over. When the third month arrived, the battle in the place reached its peak again. The reason for that was because a group of virtue rooters with the bodies of snakes had charged towards them from the galaxy. There were thousands of them, and while the person in the lead was not in Mastery Realm, he was only half a step away from it. All of his people were incredibly powerful. When they closed in, the sounds of battle surged into the sky. If they were the only ones, it would have been fine, but almost at the same time the group of virtue rooters arrived, 2 long arcs charged through the galaxy. They were 2 huge dark turtles. Those turtles were 1,000 feet big, and on their backs sat a man and a woman. The man's skin was green, and there was a red glare in his eyes. A freezing presence spread out from his body. As for the woman, she was incredibly seductive. She did not have many clothes on, and there was an enchanting look on her face that could move people's hearts and souls. The fifth ocean is so lively. The woman smiled coquettishly and patted the dark turtle beneath her. The turtle immediately charged forward. Their approach and the arrival of a large number of virtue rooters caused the battle to become completely disadvantageous to Su Ming. Progenitor Long Hai's expression changed. Progenitor Flame's pupils shrank, and Reverend Z Long frowned. The three of them might not have used their full strength, but even if they did, they would not be able to see hope. After all, this was only the third month. There were still 9 more months to go. At the instant Z Long and the other 2 hesitated, Zhu Yu Kai, who had remained as calm as Su Ming, opened his eyes, and a hint of calmness appeared in them. He slowly stood up, and at the instant he did so, a presence that did not match his body at all appeared on his fat body. When that presence spread out, Zhu Yu Kai closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he gave off a feeling as if he had become another person. He was like a sharp spear that had been drawn from its sheath, and a sharp that could shake the sky and earth erupted from him with a bang. He lifted his right hand and seized the air in Su Ming's direction. Immediately, the life inequity spear in front of Su Ming shuddered and let out a hum that sounded like it was cheering. It flew up and appeared in Zhu Yu Kai's lifted right palm like a bolt of lightning. Once he held it, Zhu Yu Kai's presence rose again. It swept up the galaxy, through space into chaos, affected the laws, and shook all the people who were fighting beyond the fifth ocean at that moment. All the people, no matter who they were, felt their hearts tremble violently at that instant. Their cultivation bases also showed signs of weakening, as if they had withered away. In shock, they swiftly looked in the direction where the terrifying ripples of power came from. As Zhu Yu Kai held the long spear, his presence erupted from his entire body. He might still be fat, but no matter who looked at him, they would not see a body like this, but a giant who could support the world. In fact, as the space behind Zhu Yu Kai distorted, an indistinct figure appeared. That figure belonged to a middle-aged man, a white-haired man with a forlorn face and a heart filled with grief and despair. At that moment, he was no longer Zhu Yu Kai, but true Sacredine World wore immortal Changhe. There were 2 souls in his body. One of them was Zhu Yu Kai, and the other was Changhe. These two souls would occasionally fuse together, and at other times they would separate, but at that moment, Chang He's will stood towering in the universe. With the long spear in his right hand, Zhu Kai lifted it in front of him in a seemingly slow manner, then lowered his head and mumbled softly, "What joy is there in living? What joy is there in living?" Zhu Kai sighed as he slowly swung the spear in his hand toward the starry sky in front of him. With it, the galaxy instantly froze. A tear in space tore through space in front of Zhu Kai, and it traveled slowly into the distance. As it moved forward, the tear grew larger until it eventually turned into a gigantic dimensional crack that was 100,000 feet long. The crack might have seemed to be spreading slowly, but all the matter in the galaxy seemed to have been frozen at that moment. Because of it, this slowness was no longer slow, but an extreme speed in the world. As it swept through space, the first thing it touched was the two-headed giant who was fighting against Reverend Zilong. There was shock in the giant's eyes, but he could not dodge it and was enveloped by the crack. Then, the two people fighting against Progenitor Long Hai were also swept through by the crack. The near 1,000 cultivators fighting against Flame Fiend's progenitor, the thousands of virtue rooters who had arrived, and the cold and enchanting man and woman sitting on the dark turtle, all of them had their bodies pierced through by the 100,000 feet crack. When the 100,000 feet crack shot through space and disappeared into the horizon, everything in the area seemed to have woken up from its stillness and returned to normal. But at the instant everything returned to normal, there were no screams of pain or struggles. The body of the two-headed giant in front of Zilong was torn to pieces. Even his nascent divinity could not escape and was reduced to nothingness. The two people in front of Long Hai met the same fate. The near 1,000 living beings fighting against Flame Fiend's progenitor were no exception. No matter what level of cultivation they had, the thousands of virtue rooters were reduced to ashes at that instant. The man and woman on the dark turtle who had just arrived also became a part of space at the instant the galaxy returned to normal. It was just like what Zhu Kai had said previously. What joy is there in living? It would be better to die. The area was in dead silence. Reverend Zilong shuddered. He had not expected this to happen in the slightest. It had happened too suddenly. The powerful destructive power had caused Zilong to be unable to fight back at all. If Long Hai wanted to kill him, then no matter how many of him there were, it would be difficult for him to fight back. He would be reduced to ashes, just like what had happened before his eyes. An almighty in life realm. He's indeed the war immortal Chang He. Reverend Zilong's face was pale. When he looked at Zhu Kai, fear appeared in his eyes. Progenitor Long Hai was stunned on the spot. Even if he was an almighty in mastery realm, to him, life realm was an indescribable realm. It was a realm he did not even dare to dream about. After all, fate realm was already his greatest desire. As for life realm, he had never thought that he would be able to step into it. To him, the strength of life realm was the same as when a cultivator in chi refinement realm saw a cultivator in nascent soul realm. Flame Fiend's progenitor shuddered. During that instant just now, he might not have sensed his own death, but he had sensed the terror of the thousands of people beside him instantly losing their life force. An almighty in life realm, an art to reverse life and death. Is this Zhu Kai? This isn't a normal life realm. This is the sign of someone about to step into death realm. Only by doing so can he reverse life and death like this. Reverend Zilong lifted his head swiftly and looked at Zhu Kai. A zealous look appeared in his eyes. Su Ming had long since opened his eyes. When he looked at Zhu Kai in front of him, he saw the loneliness on the illusory man's face. He saw the sorrow on his face, as well as the loneliness and pain of a dead heart. He remembered the scenes he had seen when he obtained the life inequity spear. As the prodigy of true sacredine world, as the disciple of the sublime paragon, and as the future culpal lord of true sacredine world, Chang He could only watch as his lover turned into a medicinal core. When his master asked him to swallow the medicinal core and step into death realm, He chose to fight back and struggle for the first time in his life. He chose to say no to his master in a crazed manner. He was willing to give up on everything in order to redeem everything. If he had to use this method to step in a death realm, he would rather not. What joy is there in living? Su Ming asked softly. Zhu Yukai lowered his head, and the presence on his body instantly disappeared. Once he returned to his original self, he let go of the long spear in his hand. It let out a mournful hum and returned to Su Ming, stabbing into the spot where it had originally been stabbed. Zhu Yukai sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes. Apathy and fatigue appeared on his face. There was a sadness that others could not sense very clearly about him. Only Su Ming, who had read his story, could sense it. That sadness had already fused with his soul. Zilong, Huayu, and Huayu returned quietly and sat down around him. Occasionally, they would look at Zhu Yukai with great respect on their faces. After a long while, Su Ming closed his eyes again. Time passed. The 3rd month, the 4th month, and the 5th month passed. No more existences from Divine Essence Star Ocean came to the 5th ocean. It was as if this place had turned into a forbidden zone. Due to the bloody stench that filled the 5th ocean and the presence of the dimensional cracks that could not be dispelled, all the people who came to the 5th ocean chose to leave once their expressions changed. However, when the 6th month arrived, the most mysterious of the 4 great outsider clans, the Rungwu clan, arrived outside the 5th sea. The patriarch of the Rungwu clan had also arrived, along with an old man from the Virtue Rook clan, whose scales were rotting and whose hair was white. They stood about tens of thousands of feet away from Su Ming and the others. When they looked into the distance, a freezing glare shone in their eyes. It's been 6 months. It's about time for the guardians of the 5th ocean to appear. Su Ming had replenished himself for 4 consecutive days. Tomorrow was the last day, and he would be done replenishing himself. He suddenly felt very happy, even if the disgusting things he had done on that day made him frustrated. But today is my birthday. There's no reason for me to be frustrated. I'm going to celebrate my birthday. Mom is treating me to a meal. I want monthly votes and recommendation votes today. I'll use the name of my birthday once a year. To be continued. If you like this work, please come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1130. Rungwu race was the most mysterious race among the 4 great alien races in the core of Divine Essence Star Ocean. This race had existed for an endless amount of time and had never declined. They had always occupied the position of the strongest race in Divine Essence Star Ocean, and their position had never been shaken. They had stayed in the core of Divine Essence Star Ocean for a long period of time and fought against countless ferocious beasts, causing powerful warriors to appear in large numbers, and they had also assimilated with the ferocious beasts. The appearances of their people were almost completely different. Some of them still looked like humans, but some of them had already given up on their human forms and turned into ferocious creatures that were half human and half beast. At that moment, when the Rung Wus appeared in the 5th ocean, Zi Long and the others immediately focused their gazes on them. As they looked over, their expressions changed. There was not just one almighty in mastery realm among the Rungwu race, but 3. Just this alone was enough for Rungwu race to become the leader of the 4 great races. Besides these 3 people, there was a white-haired old man standing right in front of them. He stood in the air barefooted, and his feet were covered in scales. The rest of his body was no different from a normal person's, but the power he showed was enough to suppress the 3 almighties in mastery realm behind him. This person was the current progenitor of the Rungwus. His level of cultivation made it seem like the space around him would occasionally distort. It was as if he could turn laws into laws of fate wherever he stood. Clearly, he was an almighty in fate realm. However, this was still secondary. The group of Rinwu clansmen was surrounded by a faintly discernible pressure. This pressure came from the bloodline of the Rinwu clansmen. It was a hidden call. This summoning was formed from the power of the Rungwu race's progenitors over the countless years. It was a form of protection from their ancestors that allowed them to become the strongest race in divine essence Star Ocean. This protective power was so powerful that it caused Zhu Yukai to open his eyes. The area was silent. The Rung Wus who had arrived had bloodshot eyes and madness in them, but they stood there without moving. They were incredibly quiet. The more they behaved this way, the thicker the mighty pressure enveloping the area. Standing beside Rung Wu's progenitor was Virtue Rooter's progenitor. He had a snake's body and a human's head, and his hair was white. At that moment, a sinister look shone in his eyes. The ripples of power from the appearance of the fifth stone surpassed all the previous ones, which is why so many people came here. But I won't participate in the fight for this stone. I only want this person's head. Virtue Rooter's progenitor lifted his right hand and pointed at Su Ming. If not for the fact that this fluctuation is the strongest in history, I would not have come personally. A hoarse voice was slowly emitted from the mouth of the Rung Wu tribe's patriarch. Seal the outside world and inform all outsiders that this place has been occupied by the Rung Wu clan for the past half a year. Anyone who steps into this place will be killed. A barely noticeable glint appeared in the eyes of the old man from the Rung Wu tribe. When he spoke faintly, the hundreds of Rung Wu tribe members behind him immediately retreated without a sound until they were 100,000 feet away. They formed an arc, and their bodies shone with a dark light. From afar, they looked like a seal. There's no need to do anything. The guardian of the fifth sea has already arrived. A cold smile appeared on the Rung Wu clan's patriarch's face. As he spoke, the entire fifth sea suddenly began to churn violently. As it tumbled, rumbling sounds echoed. This change immediately attracted the attention of Zi Long and the others. When they looked over, they saw the rumbling sounds coming from the fifth sea, and there were 4 figures rapidly approaching from within. Behind these 4 figures were countless long arcs that charged forth and closed in on them. They were obscured by the sea mist, but as they approached, after a while, Zi Long and the others were able to see their faces clearly, causing their expressions to change drastically. The 4 people at the very front were all wearing white masks. Their masks were respectively depicting happiness, anger, grief, and resentment. Behind them, within the large number of rays of light, were expressionless people wearing black leather armor. These people stood on long arcs. As they charged forward, they immediately appeared behind Su Ming and the others. As Su Ming sat there, he opened his eyes, and a strange light shone within them. They're finally here, Su Ming thought. In truth, at the instant he activated the fifth stone and the long arc shot through the fifth sea, he had sensed the existence of the guardian of the fifth sea in the depths of the long arc sacrifice. A voice that no one else could hear echoed in Su Ming's mind at that moment. It was a voice that only those who had the fifth stone could hear, the words of the guardian of the fifth sea. Once he heard it, Su Ming closed his eyes. Right then, they had the Rung Wu clan locking down the area in front of them, and the guardian of the fifth sea behind them. A powerful sense of danger immediately rose in Zi Long and the others' hearts. It was especially so for the 4 people in the white masks. Their eyes were aloof, and the ripples of power spreading out from their bodies showed that they were all almighties in Mastery Realm. Hand over the fifth stone, and all of you can leave. The person with the mask of happiness spoke faintly in the middle of the bleak and murderous aura in the fifth sea. When he spoke, the galaxy around him immediately roared. Countless bolts of lightning spread out in all directions, and as he spoke, the area around him turned into a region filled with lightning. His words are like thunder. Zilong's expression changed again, and he instinctively took a few steps back. Flame Fiend's progenitor's face turned pale. By his side, Long Hai's eyes sparkled. He cast a glance at Su Ming, then at Zhu Yukai. Freedom might be valuable, and it might be rare to exchange 1 year for 1,000 or 10,000 years, but if I have to use my life as the price, then I will have to make a new choice, progenitor Long Hai said calmly, then slowly moved back. Even if this is a violation of our agreement, just treat it as if I did not fulfill my oath. If you want to shatter the oath, there is nothing I can do." As he spoke, Patriarch Longhai's body suddenly swept backwards, and he charged towards where the Ring Wu clan was. "Progenitor of the Rung Wu clan, do you still remember me? I was bound by an agreement today, which is why I had to protect this place. Right now, since I no longer have the power to reverse the situation, I hope that progenitor of the Rung Wu clan will open the path and let me leave. I will definitely repay your kindness in the future." Progenitor Longhai wrapped his fist in his palm and bowed towards the Rung Wu clan. A glint appeared in the eyes of the Rung Wu clan's progenitor, and a hint of a smile appeared at the corners of his lips. "I see, fellow Taoist Longhai. It's fine. My fellow Taoists, if you want to leave, I will definitely not make things difficult for you. What we want is the fifth stone and the current possessor. As for the others, you can leave." As he spoke, Rung Wu clan's progenitor lifted his right hand. Immediately, the people behind him moved to the sides and revealed a path. Progenitor Longhai rushed over, bowed to them again, then turned into a long arc and charged into the distance through the open path. Su Ming's expression did not change even a single bit when he saw Progenitor Longhai leaving. He still had his eyes closed, as if he was meditating. Flame Fiend's progenitor hesitated for a moment. When he looked towards Su Ming, a conflicted look appeared in his eyes. After a long while, he let out a long sigh. He could imagine that Longhai had definitely been prepared beforehand, which was why he could be so carefree. But Zilong was silent. He cast a glance at Su Ming, then at the people behind him. In the end, his gaze stopped on Zhu Yukai for a moment before he lowered his head and bowed towards Su Ming. Without mentioning a single word about the God Ascension Nectar, he turned around and charged towards the Rung Wu clan. He, too, chose to give up. It was not that Zilong had not considered the possibility that Zhu Yukai could resolve everything if he was here, but when he saw the Rung Wu clan, his belief was shaken. Others might not know much about the Rung Wu clan. They only knew that they were mysterious and were the strongest race in Divine Essence Star Ocean. However, as a member of the Four Great True Worlds, their investigations regarding the Rung Wu clan were very detailed. Zilong knew clearly that there was a mysterious legacy within the Rung Wu clan. This legacy could allow the progenitors of the race to leave behind their nascent divinities once they returned to the Barren Lands. Once the nascent divinities gathered together, they would form an existence that was like a god. This existence was the true reason why the Four Great True Worlds were wary of them. The level of cultivation of this existence was the Rung Wu clan's greatest secret, and everything related to this existence was hidden by the Rung Wu clan with everything they had. Only the forces of power from the Four Great True Worlds could find out a little about this existence. Based on the analysis of the Four Great True Worlds, this existence should have some flaws and limitations. But even so, this existence could still make the sublime paragons of the Four Great True Worlds cast sidelong glances at him. And because of that, they would not come to this place and interfere with the race's reproduction. That was why when Zilong saw the Rung Wu clan, his heart was already shaken. When he saw the guardians of the Fifth Ocean, and especially the four people with the masks of happiness, anger, sorrow, and happiness, he no longer had any confidence in Su Ming. The four people might seem to only be in Mastery Realm, but Zilong knew that they had existed for a very, very long time. Their happiness, anger, sorrow, and happiness were also passed down through generations. That was why he chose to leave. The God Ascension Nectar might be important, but compared to his life, it was still secondary. When Flame Fiend's progenitor saw Zilong leaving as well, the conflict in his heart reached its peak, but when he cast a glance at Su Ming again, he gritted his teeth and did not leave. At that moment, even Flame Fiend's progenitor himself did not know what he was thinking. He only felt that since he had been by Su Ming's side in the fifth kiln and witnessed the miracles that shocked him non-stop, he had a vague feeling that the danger this time could be resolved. Just at this moment, the guardian of the fifth sea, the person with the mask of happiness, let out a cold snort. His body moved forward, and suddenly overlapping images appeared on his body. It was as if he had split into a clone. His real self was still there, but his clone took a step forward and charged towards Flame Fiend's progenitor while stepping on lightning. A fierce glare shone in Flame Fiend's progenitor's eyes. Since he had decided to stay, he had made all preparations. At the instant the clone of the person with the mask of happiness closed in, Flame Fiend's progenitor rushed forward, and the two of them immediately engaged in a battle in midair. To be continued. If you like this work, please come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.